Hi, my name is Bob Greenyer, and I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. So, welcome this 12th January 2025. Happy New Year to everyone out there in Internet land. To this O Day. There is no O. How is everyone? Can you hear me? Buenas noches. Mika Avila. Well done for guessing correctly. Excellent. Wonderful. So, over the past several years, we have shown that there are two potential ways in which you can gain energy in non-conventional ways from the fractal toroidal moment and these exotic vacuum objects / ball lightning that we have been investigating. I have hinted at a third way, and I'm going to have a quiz which will run through this presentation, and I'm not going to tell you what it is unless someone guesses. But anyway, as I go through this presentation, you should realize that there is a third way in which we will effectively get massive over unity. Now, the maths has already been done, but I committed to you that I would not involve you with maths in order to implicitly know that this can happen. The first way, which I have discussed, is the decay of baryons. And you can look at the David Freiberger paper from 2009, which does the Maxwell extended electrodynamics equations, and leads to a vacuum current that can cause the diality angle to go through a critical threshold, which causes the baryons, that is protons and neutrons, to lose their reference to the Dirac sea and cause them to collapse. And this is matter decay, which works out 10 to the 2 roughly times more power than you get from fusion, which is more power per nucleon than you get from fission, which is already millions times more than you typically get from chemical energy. So that is very powerful. The other way is that suggested by Geverblis in his 1995 paper, and that is at the center of the fractal toroidal geometry. You end up being able to create a electromagnetic phantom with closed pointing vectors, and this allows for capturing of zero-point energy and vacuum fluctuations. Now, there is a third way. Of course, any way that is over unity leads to infinite energy, so I'll take any of these. And that is what I would like you to try and guess today. Okay, so O-Day. There is no O for those that are exercising their Semmelweis reflex. For those that attended the Open Evo Labs call, you will recognize what I'm about to read to you here. But here we have Agent Smith from the Matrix franchise, and he's giving a very stern look, trying to convince you that there is no O. There is no O. There is no O, okay? Just in the same way that one might have said that there is no spoon. Kind of, but not really. So what is the Semmelweis reflex? The Semmelweis reflex is a term describing the tendency of people to reject new evidence or knowledge because it contradicts established norms, practices, or beliefs. It is named after Ignaz Semmelweis, a 19th century Hungarian physician who discovered that hand washing could drastically reduce mortality rates from puerperal fever, I probably got that wrong again, in maternity wards. Despite presenting clear evidence, Semmelweis's colleagues and the broader medical community initially rejected his findings, illustrating a cognitive bias against new ideas. It is characterized by resistance to change, There's an inherent resistance to altering long-held practices or beliefs, even when faced with compelling evidence. And I hope by the end of today, or this presentation, you will see that there is more compelling evidence out there for what we have been discussing. Confirmation biases. People tend to seek out or interpret information in a way that confirms their preconceptions, ignoring or rationalizing away contradictory data. Yes, and that goes for me, that goes for you, that goes for everyone. But if you get new information that radically presents visual fact, nature reporting on itself, and if you are struggling really hard to get that into your current theory of how things work, then you might be exhibiting a little bit of Semmelweis reflex. Authority and tradition. There's often a deference to existing authority or traditional methods over innovation or evidence-based practice. Yes, no one likes a maverick. Fear of disruption. Change can be unsettling, leading to a protective reaction against ideas that could disrupt the status quo or personal comfort. And this is really where we see the Agent Smith rear its ugly head as a metaphor. It might be your family, it might be your friends, it might be your tutor, it might be your student. It might be the person in the shop, it might be the person in the bar. All kinds of people will become an Agent Smith because maybe it affects their life or their comfort or their frame of reference on how the world works. It serves as a cautionary tale in science and medicine, emphasizing the importance of an open-minded, evidence-based approach to knowledge and practice. It underscores the need for critical thinking and the willingness to challenge and reassess established doctrines. How do you avoid it? Well, you should cultivate an open-minded culture that values evidence over tradition. Evidence over tradition. Encourage continuous learning and critical thinking within your community or organization. Implement structured processes for evaluating new ideas or data like peer reviews or scientific method application. Foster an environment where questioning the status quo is welcomed and skepticism is balanced with curiosity. Educate on cognitive biases, promoting awareness of confirmation bias and the appeal to authority. Finally, ensure there's a mechanism for updating practices based on new evidence, making change a norm rather than an exception. So, I have to thank Tibby, who sent me a paper that is several years old now, and it's associated with the group at the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. And I have no idea why I did not come across this paper before, but this paper was submitted a couple of months after I gave my presentation in Sochi in 2018. It was submitted in December of 2018, and it was published in September of 2019. One of the referenced authors in this paper, was Zhigalov, who I spent quite a bit of time with at the conference in Sochi there in 2018. And I don't know whether there is some influence of what I said on the subject matter that's been released. I don't know whether it's just coincidence. I've not seen these particular pieces of data reported in their other work, some of the ones which I will focus on today. But it is quite spooky to be reading this document. So I want to thank Tibby, and this shows the power of the crowd finding things. Okay, so before we go there, I just want to talk about the rather tragic situation that has happened in California. And my heart goes out to all of those that have lost loved ones or property and the stress that they are going under. But when I was watching a news stream, I managed to capture a video here of a phenomenon which we had seen in other similar fires, but this clip, I grabbed it and I will play it now. And as you can see, it is what's called a fire tornado. And why I was particularly interested in this clip is because within its dynamic nature, it reveals something about the phenomena in my view. So it goes full screen now. I actually think that I don't know whether this was actually on the side of a hill or the camera on the helicopter or wherever it was on the tilt. It kind of seems that the land, based on the tree growing, is actually flatter than it looks in this video. Okay, so that is that video. And it's rotating around to the right. You can see. Some beauty in a moment of tragedy. The wonder of nature. It'll make sense why I'm showing you this in a brief moment. So what I did was I stabilized using some of the trees in the foreground, some images, and took some selected frames to work with here. Okay, and it's when I got to this frame here that I noticed something rather interesting. So it's actually this frame and this frame which exhibit the phenomena. In most of the other frames, when it's much less stable, tornado is a straight line or firenado. The rotation is round this way. Okay, and what we see actually is a branching here. And you can imagine this is leading away, so it's brighter on this side and it's coming back round. And that frame here really got me interested in this particular sequence, as I will show you, and I think you might know where I'm going. So Rotas thinks that's the pinch. I think that's above the pinch. I think that's basically the, how shall we put this, the navel in the apple. So the feeding is coming in here. This is your stalk in your apple, and this is the navel in the apple. And so I'm going to overlay the sacred geometry, the magneto-hydrodynamic structure here, and I'm scaling it from here to the ground effectively, and you will see what we see. Effectively, this spread here for me is the point at which this part of the magneto-hydrodynamic vortex that's in the ether is starting to pull this out. So it twists out at that point. Okay? As we know from other tornadoes, there is a gap above the ground at which the material is not affected. So you can maybe recall the one where the building was turning to dust above a certain height, but it wasn't, there was no real affected area at the bottom. And of course, a tornado, firenado, is a sort of hot plasma cousin of a normal tornado. And we have been extensively investigating the invention of one Frank Polifka. And what did he do? Well, he studied from very early childhood all the way through his life the behavior of tornadoes. And what he came up with is the wind hex here. And as you can see, the base of the wind hex in the same position here lines up. It has the vortex spinning around in the correct direction and going up through the central channel here. Okay, let's take another example here. This is the other one. It's moved a little bit from here, but relatively in the same place. Okay, of course, the ether vortex has moved down slightly. You can see here it's moved down slightly. Okay, and we will overlay the magnetohydrodynamic structure. Again, it's still lofted from the ground, splaying out at the top there as it's gone through that pinch part there. And we'll overlay both the sacred geometry, the magnetohydrodynamic vortex, and the wind hex here, so you can see the relative positions there, and just the wind hex geometry alone. Now, taking one where it's a little unstable, but it's pulling all the way through, we see this. Okay, and I actually chose this frame for the title frame on a video that I shared. And if we go to the magnetohydrodynamic structure here, okay, you see that the vortex is relatively confined within the Sothic triangle until it goes through the Chi-Rho, and then it comes out again, still twisting. But overlaying the wind hex here, we can see that this very bright area down the bottom is contained within the cone shape. And we'll go and take out the magnetohydrodynamic structure. Okay. And you can actually, if you put material into even our version of the wind hex without the steam and without the charge separation, even just in that version and in the mini wind hex of Henk Urian, you see this kind of spiral vortice going up right the way in the center. We've characterized this quite clearly already. So look what happens when I go down and I go forward and back. You can actually see that that cone, that brighter cone, is within the cone of the Frank Palivka wind hex. And you can also see that there's this fire circle that pinches up to a cone that then joins into the center of this, right in the bottom there. Now you can imagine that there's a change in speed on the outside here. There's a discrete change in speed, and that is what allows the particles to come down the side and come out as the free-flowing powder. Okay, so that is what I wanted to share with you. So nature is a terrible thing sometimes when you're on the whip end of it, as it were. But it does try and tell you what it's doing and how it's working. Okay, so what we're now going to look at is this paper that was sent to me by Tibby. Thank you, Tibby. Analysis of action of pinch plasmoids in a periodic discharge in a liquid flow on ambient medium. Okay, and the guy is Nesterovich, and he's from the National Research Nuclear University, Moscow, Engineering Physics Institute. Okay, so give me a second to pull this up. I have lots of notes on this, of course. Okay. probably good enough. Right, so again, as I said, it was submitted December the 14th. It was revised that same day. I think there was another revision. It was accepted March 18th, 2019 and published in September 2019. I haven't posted the link to the paper. I don't know whether it's directly available, but I will post the link after the show. Okay. So a periodic discharge in a liquid flow is an effective tool for modifying the surfaces of metal articles, which is aimed at increasing their durability. This is very interesting because this is what was told to me by the military guy in the US, is why they do this thing. They specifically said it was for airframe landing gear. Hardness and corrosion resistance. Of course, this is something that people talk about, that column that's in India. Analysis of the discharge properties for determining limiting potentials of this method and for optimizing technological regimes has revealed several formerly unknown physical phenomena. These factors may be considered for determining safety measures in implementation of industrial technologies. A new element in analysis is the inclusion of anomalous manifestations like bulbs, tracks, and filaments detected in the ambient medium. So discharge here is plasmatorids, aka plasmoids, glow, magnetic charges. What might that be? Gravitational model. Interesting. Introduction. The method based on the formation of a periodic high voltage discharge in a liquid flow, plasma discharge liquid flow, is a promising method for implementing the action of electric discharges on materials. They've got a whole bunch of references, some which I have looked at in depth before in that list there. The liquid jet used in this case plays the role of current carrier electrode and a switching, forming a sequence of electric discharge pulses of duration on the order of a few nanoseconds and longer. So it's actually using the fluid itself. This is something that I didn't quite clock when I was in Suhas Ralkar's lab. And this may actually be going on in all discharges in water. The actual water has shock waves, and the shock waves themselves end up by producing extremely short duration, high current pulses. You get it for free. In the conditions of a swift electric discharge, the conditions for extremal states, high electric and magnetic field strengths, shock action, excessive electron component, presence of water as well as H+, Ohm+, and OH+, etc. ions are created and in the electrode space and on the planar cathode surface. This method has already found technological applications in strengthening and improving the durability of structural materials. Experimental technique. This is actually not a long paper, so I'm going to read all of it because I don't want anyone to miss out on anything. Experimental technique, the PDLF, the plasma discharge liquid flow method, essentially lies in the emergence of a quasi-periodic high current discharge on the surface of the liquid jet when a voltage from a power supply with a descending current voltage characteristics is applied to an accumulator. In this case, the liquid flow is interrupted due to the action of shock waves emerging during the discharge, i.e., current switching occurs automatically. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? Analysis of the electrical and optical characteristics of the discharge was performed by two methods, by obtaining a 2D image and by obtaining a 3D stereo image using high-speed cameras. At the first stage of research, a SKS-1M high-speed movie camera with a shooting speed from 150 to 4,000 frames per second was used. For obtaining a stereo image, shooting was performed by two synchronized cameras arranged at an angle of 90 degrees to each other. Experimental results. In the course of control over the feeding parameters and liquid, water as a rule, flow conditions, The most typical types of discharge can be realized with all the features of an arc discharge as well as a pinch discharge with a height of usually 4 to 5 millimeters and up to 8 to 10 millimeters with a base on the earth electrode surface of less than 1 millimeter, not exceeding 0.3 millimeters as a rule. In theta pinches, electrons start moving in the upper part, and this motion has features of a Z-pinch, i.e. it is generally vertical, then rotational in the horizontal plane. So I guess vertical and then rotational, or rotational and then vertical. There's your two options. Detailed analysis of the photo and shooting images shows that the upper part of the pinch is formed as a spherical cloud that sometimes has a polyhedral surface. In the immediate vicinity of a theta pinch, glowing bulb-shaped and arc-shaped objects with a characteristic size of 2 to 4 millimeters are often detected. And we've shown these in other papers from the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute and the work of Bogdanovich et al. I will include the other references and other discussions in the notes on the blog at Remote View. To study ionization and recording radiation accompanying the discharge in its immediate vicinity, at a distance of about 20 centimeters from the discharge axis, X-ray films were installed so that their plane was vertical and the orientation was tangential to the circle with the center on axis. Analysis of images on the film revealed imprints with a nearly elliptical shape, resembling elliptical birds with wings. Figure 2. So here we go, imprints in the form of birds on the X-ray film installed near the discharge. These are the classic birds that have been observed by the Bogdanovich team, by Perevoschikov, by the team of Shishkin et al., and so forth. This could indicate the presence of ionizing radiation in the charge localization zone. The characteristic transverse size of the imprints reached about 1 centimeter, so it can be over 1 centimeter here, while the longitudinal size was up to 3 centimeters. Okay? To find the reasons and circumstances for the emergence of luminous plasmoids in the space surrounding the discharge zone, shooting of the set was performed using appropriate light filters and without them. Analysis of the results revealed the presence of luminescent plasmoids with a diameter of up to a few 2 to 5 centimeters, which moved from the discharge region in the direction close to horizontal. The glow of plasmoids changes color from white to blue and then to red, which can be interpreted as cooling of the plasma bunch in air. The direction of motion can be determined by the direction of the electric field lines if we assume that the bunch charge polarity is on the whole the same as that of a high voltage electrode, negative in our case. Analysis of the surface of the collector, which has the form of a dielectrical metal plate of diameter 10 to 20 centimeters, which was installed in the vertical plane perpendicular to the plasmoid trajectory at a distance of 5 to 50 centimeters, revealed the presence of tracks that had not been detected earlier. Immediately after the session of a total duration of about 8 to 10 minutes on the plate surface located at a distance of about 50 centimeters. So 50 centimeters away from this discharge, which only lasted for, or sequence of discharges that only lasted for about 8 to 10 minutes, they saw these tracks, and longer, as well as after a few tens of minutes, which is sufficient for evaporating water drops if the distance is shorter than 30 centimeters. The number of tracks on the surface of collectors placed into special containers, Petri dishes, or others increased with time up to several days. Now, this is exactly what we observed with Suhas Ralkar's fuel, although it was more extreme. The tracks grew over a period of days. I will include a reference to that work in the blog at remoteview.icu. This was also observed by Sergei Godin when he replicated the Vachayev reactor. This Vachayev reactor could take dirty effluent gases or dirty fluids and it had a coil and copper electrodes and pulses of that, and it would produce these metals out of the dirty material, these metal spherules. He collected these metal spherules, put them in a glass petri dish, and over a period of time, tracks came from the spherules and cut through the glass. So here we go. So something is being born out of these things post-experiment. And in this case, they note it's for up to several days and then remained unchanged. So after a period of time, there was no more tracks. An analogous situation was observed for the surfaces of metal electrodes used as earth electrodes in the discharge, but not affected by its direct action of discharges at a distance of up to a few centimeters from caverns formed by the discharge. So yeah, so on the actual material, where from, yeah, okay, so actually on the material, some extra tracks appeared over a period of days. Additionally here, this was during the runs, they saw these luminous spherical and arc-shaped plasmoids after the termination. So these things were still flying around in the air after the plasma discharge liquid flow was stopped. For determining the reasons for emerging tracks, round-the-clock surveillance was organised over the surfaces subject to overall or partial action of plasma discharge liquid flow. Video recording showed the presence of luminous objects moving over the surface and leaving tracks on it. During night, so I don't know what you missed there. Tedious. I don't know it's going to catch up with you either. Anyway, just to recap the last part, and you will have the paper. I'll have to keep an eye on this, so if we've got a dodgy connection, that'll be tedious. About 20 seconds. Okay, so I'm just going to read the last paragraph here. For determining the reasons for emerging tracks, round-the-clock surveillance was organised over the surfaces subject to the overall or partial action of the plasma discharge liquid flow. Video recordings showed the presence of luminous objects moving over the surface and leaving tracks on it. So these are the papers that I've already talked about in the past and that were done at the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. During nighttime, luminous points with a size less than 1 millimeter could be seen on the surface, which glowed for several days or even longer. Individual luminescent objects moved over the surface. These points presumably had a toroidal structure and rotated around their axis. Their transverse size was up to 50 micrometers, and their velocity varied from 1 millimeter per second to 10 meters per second. The color of the glow was green. In some cases, dark regions could be observed in them, which presumably rotated together around the toroid axis. So you have dark regions rotating around this overall glowing torus. Sounds a bit like it might be a torus made of tori, rather. Luminescent spherical objects moving over the surface was also observed earlier, but their size reached a few millimeters and the lifetime did not exceed a few seconds. Toroidal microplasmoids are observed for a few tens of seconds. Okay, so basically they created in these experiments, plasma discharge liquid flow experiments, these structures that were apparently toroidal in shape, glowing on metal for several days, moving over the surface at a speed of 1 millimeter per second to 10 meters per second. So very large difference in speed, and they glowed green, and it would be, in their view, a reason for the emerging tracks. Okay. There are videos of plasma spheres with, or rather images, and there is also an image in a Murakami, I think, or a spark plug water vapor discharge that we published, I think, 2017, long before this work ever showed the same thing. Okay, so discussion. The construction of the model of the phenomena under investigation and the interpretation of experimental results can be based on the analytical data from other experiments, in particular from analysis of X-ray studies that coincide with the results obtained from the investigation of plasma discharge liquid flow almost completely. We are speaking of the so-called birds on X-ray films, which have a specific shape and size almost coinciding with or close to those described above. These results were obtained by researchers from the National Research Nuclear University Moscow Engineering Physics Institute, MEPHI, on electron accelerators generating ionizing bremsstrahlung radiation with maximal photon energies in different ranges, 3 to 9, 20, and 320 megaelectron volts. So in this case, what they were doing, they had a couple of magnets here, some X-ray film over here, or rather 2 poles of a large magnet here, X-ray film here. They had an accelerator accelerating electrons into a target, produced gamma rays. The gamma rays did something in the zone of the magnetic poles. And on one side, you've got magnetic north poles, and on the other side, you've got magnetic south poles, which were presumably the opposite of the poles that the gamma rays were interacting with. I've talked about that paper before, and I will link it in the description. The former 2 accelerators were constructed at MEPHI, and the latter, PACRA synchrotron, was constructed in the Lebedev Physical Institute, Russian Academy of Sciences. Such imprints were also detected by other researchers on other facilities. The general factor responsible for their emergence in all cases is ionizing radiation with different energies. This can be either photon radiation or of corpuscular electron radiation. As noted in reference 6, the unique shape of the imprint may indicate the presence of an object containing ionizing particles from a cascade process, in particular electrons from ionized air, which form a flow with the cross-section having the shape of the imprint on the film. And I've discussed this at great length, that if I can get my torus up here, we've got a torus. This is not the right kind of torus, but if you can imagine that this has a whole bunch of electrons orbiting around it, or it's comprised of things that will end up forming electrons, when this hits the surface and breaks up, there's some spinning around. Some of them will come off the top and make the top of the mushroom, and others will be pulled in and make the line through the back. Okay, so I've described that many times. Okay. With the cross-section having the shape of an imprint on the film, on the X-ray film surface, or the immediate vicinity of it. Reconstruction of 2D image upon transition to the 3D object indicates the formation in the air of objects resembling in shape the theta pinch over the surface of the Earth electrode. The presence of this electrode in air can be explained by admitting the existence of objects with the properties of a magnetic monopole in the ionized air medium. So the way to create this is to have something that has the properties of a magnetic monopole. And Bogdanovich et al. Suggested in their paper, I think it was the one on long-lived plasmoids, the paper that I have referred to a number of times, and even recently at ICMNS, and the Tesla Tech presentation that I gave recently, and it is this one by Wisniewski in 2008. This is what they cite, and there is electrons coming down into a magnetic core. The magnetic core is shaped like this. It has a focus which acts as a topological monopole. And so that is what they believe is a potential topological monopole, Dirac compliant. Okay. The main difference from the available models explaining the existence of monopoles with the electron trail in the form of rotating electron flow is the quantitative characteristic sizes, numbers of electrons, etc., with the qualitative differences, temporal stability, functional action on the medium, and so on. The phenomena described above were explained from the standpoint of plasma physics using the results of the general theory of relativity, GRT, which were obtained from analysis of the mechanisms of formation of pinch plasmoids without magnetic monopoles. To generalize these results to the case where magnetic monopoles are present in the ionization volume, we can assume that dipoles that generally have zero magnetic charge existed in this volume prior to ionization, but form particles with unlike northern and southern polarities after the action of ionizing radiation. The role of such particles could be played by molecules of air and water vapor, like hydrogen molecule, oxygen molecule, nitrogen molecule, etc. If this set of molecules includes, at least after the action of ionizing radiation, such that have monopoles like protons with electrons, or without them, electrons complete a molecular bond prior to the action of ionizing radiation, they can form after their decay stable particles of the type of dions considered by Dirac and his contemporaries. Dions may have both electric and magnetic charge. Okay, so essentially they're saying that under these extreme conditions, the gases that are in this discharge area, obviously oxygen and nitrogen are already in the air, and hydrogen is synthesized from the effective electrolysis that's going on, then you can, additionally with this extreme environment, create these dions which may have both electric and magnetic charge. As shown in 12, the Dirac quantization conditions can be generalized to the existence and interaction of two such particles. It was shown that only the assumption concerning the existence of particles carrying both magnetic and electric charges could ensure the solution of the problem of dual invariance in electrodynamics. Okay, this was all done by Dirac. Okay, here's one of these tracks, and this is potentially, it says here, imprint produced on a metal surface by presumably spherical and ellipsoidal plasmoid. So I guess this might be the plasmoid, and this is the track that it's gouged in there. The next important stage of the multi-cascade process is presumably the formation of pinch plasmoids containing magnetic charges, in all probability dions formed after their ionization and separation by an external field. Okay, so you have fields in there, you have the material that you can start to make the dions from. This is their argument, and with those dions you end up by accumulating magnetic charges. It was mentioned earlier that the existence of cluster-type formations containing positively and negatively charged particles, as well as neutral atoms and molecules in the quasi-stable state, is possible both theoretically and experimentally. To estimate parameters of pinch plasmoids also containing magnetic charges based on dions of the monopole proton type, it was protons that was considered as such particles, we can assume that during the formation of a plasmoid, plasmatoid, under the action of the electric field in the electrode space, dions are separated according to their polarity, i.e., a newly formed plasmoid consists of dions of the same type, e.g. of the monopole proton type. The repulsion of such dions, primarily due to the magnetic field of magnetic charges, can be compensated by the joint action of gravitational field and the Coulomb electric field due to excessive, as compared to the case with no magnetic charges, charge of the electrons in a plasmoid. So the extreme amount of charge is able to compensate for the magnetic repulsion. We can assume that the repulsion due to magnetic forces is equivalent to the repulsion of like elementary charges, considering that the magnetic charge is connected with the elementary electric charge. Okay, so they have a relationship here, 2 mu E over C equals NH bar, where N is an arbitrary integer and H bar is the Planck constant. The minimum value is 68.5 times greater than E. Okay, I guess the electric charge or whatever. You'll be wondering why I'm going over this. Sorry for the equation there. It'll reveal itself very shortly. Don't worry. Preliminary estimates show that an atmospheric pressure of 1 times 10 to the 5 pascals and a maximal degree of ionization ensured by ionizing radiation, an ionized medium with an average number of density of electrons and ions at a level of 10 to the 18 to 10 to the 19 per centimeters cubed can be formed in the air. In the first approximation, we can assume that the Dion number density does not exceed about 10 to the power minus 2, 10 to the power minus 2, 10 to the power minus 2, or that is 10 to the power minus 2. Level of 3 times 10 to the 19 per centimeter cubed, I'm not sure about this, is on the order of 10 to the 17 per centimeter cubed. It will be shown below that a more realistic estimate is about 10 to the 2 or 10 to the 4. If we consider, by way of example, a typical case when initially formed pinch plasmoid has a volume of 0.1 centimeter cubed, its volume after compression during pinching over the surface is of the order of 10 to 3 centimeter cubed, 2 orders of magnitude smaller, and that is to the minus 3. In this case, the electron number density is close to the 10 to the 17 per centimeters. I'm not sure on these units here, sorry about that. In the plane of the lower electrode, in the region of the pinch base, a colossal energy release density appears, which follows from material science tests. If we assume that the pulsed current in the discharge is at least 1 kiloamp, and the discharge voltage reaches 10 kilovolts, the pulse power density at the electrode is 1.3 times 10 to the 9 watts per centimeter squared. That is ridiculous. At such values, instant melting and partial evaporation of electrode metal occurs in a region of diameter 100 microns and a depth of about 100 micrometers and larger, followed by fast cooling. In this region and above it, a vapor cloud consists of metal atoms and molecules is formed and subjected to ionization by the electron flow. The number and density of ions and electrons in this zone is naturally smaller than their density in a solid, 10 to the 23, which is 10 to the 23 to 10 to the 24 centimeters cubed. Okay, that really is cubed. It's a little bit confusing when they do that. But higher than the atmospheric air even after compression. According to preliminary estimates, it can be of the order of 5 times 10 to the 19 per centimeter cubed. In choosing this parameter, the results of observation over the dynamics of the plasmoids after discharge were considered, which indicated the closeness of their number densities to the density of the atmosphere without abrupt rises and falls with their motion. It was shown in 13 and 14 that stable existence of a plasmoid without magnetic charges is theoretically possible for the following parameters: number of protons, 2 times 10 to the 14, number of electrons, 9.25 times 10 to the 13, number of density of charges, 5 times 10 to the 19 per centimeter cubed, and a plasmoid radius of 100 microns at the pinch base. The plasmoid mass in the center must be 7 times 10 to the minus 10 grams. That really is minus 10 there. Calculations also permit a slightly different combination of parameters: plasmoid radius 50 micrometers, number of protons 10 to the 16, number of electrons 10 to the 16, number of uncompensated charges 10 to the 15, and plasmoid mass 10 to the minus 8 grams. If we assume that the uncompensated charge in a plasmoid overcompensates the Dion charge by up to 100 times, we can estimate the number of Dions by quantity is approximately 10 to the 13. Considering that a magnetic flux quantum is about 2 times 10 to the minus 15, the total magnetic flux of the magnetic charges is 2 Teslas per meter squared. This value appears as considerably exaggerated, judging from the results of electron dynamics and magnetic fields of such clusters, which are presumably located in the surface layer after the termination of pinch discharge, or in air prior to their shift to the nearest objects, X-ray film, dielectric or metal plates, and so on. The presence of such long-lived formations in the metal substrate was initially detected in measurements with an electron microscope, when the image produced by a secondary electron disappeared, when the probing primary electron beam was directed to the point sources observed in an optical microscope as and was absent until they were placed into the discharge region. This is something similar that we observed on Lion 1, where under the electron beam there were these areas where you didn't get any photons back. Something was absorbing those electrons. The tracks on the surface were discovered in the after discharge period as traces of motion of pinch plasmoids. A much lower and more realistic value can be obtained from analysis of imprints in the form of birds or similar shapes, under the assumption that the electron trail, which is a supplement of the field of a cluster containing a magnetic charge, is formed by Cooper pairs with a high penetrability. And so that is what I was arguing in my overall theory here, in my current hypothesis, is that a toroidal thing is formed. The phase singularity and Aharonov bomb effect at the center of the fractal toroidal structure leads to the coherent matter, even of electrons, in the magnetic core. So the coherent matter would be Cooper pairs, and that would lead to the superconducting loop made of Cooper pairs. Okay. To prove this, additional experiments are planned. The passage of such electrons can be explained by the presence of ionizing radiation responsible for the emergence of magnetic charges in discharge localization region. The energy spectrum of these electrons is determined as follows from 17 by ionization energy and the energy of ionizing particles, photons and electrons. An indirect proof of this is that the wingspans of the birds obtained on the synchrotron with the energy of ionizing radiation photons several times higher than that obtained. For example, on a 2 to 4 megaelectron volt linear electron accelerator, the motion of electrons as parts of Cooper pairs in the atmosphere and in the vacuum can be similar and can be estimated by the formula for magnetic mirror relation in the so-called magnetic bottle with a magnetic field configuration close to the magnetic field of a monopole. In our case, magnetic field of a cluster containing magnetic charges. So they are creating something that would give you the kind of output that you would get if you had a monopole. And the electric field of a collective of protons, in particular forming dions. Analysis of the properties of a magnetic cluster based on dions in the composition of a plasmoid accompanied by a trail of electrons having properties of Cooper pairs can be performed using traces of subobjects on dielectric or metal surfaces located directly in the discharge region or near it at a distance. Okay, we're going to get to the meat now of a few centimeters. In some cases, the cross sections of such traces have the shape of an asymmetric ellipsoid. Figure 3, which is where's figure 3? Here. Figure 3. So this is an ellipsoid, asymmetric, okay? While in other cases, the cross-section of the object identified as a trail resembles butterfly wings, figure 4. This is figure 4. Imprint having the shape of butterfly wings on a dielectric plate. Now, when I looked at this looked very familiar. Does it look familiar to you? JK, you just come in at the right time. In the former case, we can attribute the ellipsoidal trail to the same class of bird as birds' wings, while the electron cloud configuration in the latter case resembles the radiation belt of the Earth in a magnetic field of dipole type 6. In this case, we can assume that together with the magnetic field of cluster of magnetic charges, dions, the electron trail forms an object with the shell of electrons moving over magnetic surface, which can be observed from the outside the plasmoid outside the plasmoid globe. The electrons move as magnetized electrons in the combined magnetic field. The same electrons rotate about the common axis and perform a gradient drift over both the outer and inner near the axis parts of the magnetic surface. Presumably, a cluster of magnetic charges is formed by particles with a positive electric charge. The dynamics of electrons in the field of a magnetic charge was analysed in detail in these two references. The motion of electrons near the axis is associated with their retardation in air, a decrease in the radius of rotation, and in the length of trajectory after the reflection from the magnetic mirror. The cusp that can be seen in the right part of the figure corresponds to the zone in the right part of figure 4. Okay, in this right figure, the right part of figure 4. Now, when I look at this, I see something a little bit different, as you might imagine. I see, in my view, this. What I've done here is I've rotated their image. I have not changed the scale. I've just taken this bit and I have rotated it. And if we overlay the sacred geometry, we get boom. Okay. So if I go back, you'll see that the curve comes down here and then it starts to come down here. Just as we saw on the Brock electrode, these very, very well-defined features. As we're coming out the top of the apple, you have this kind of bum shape here. Okay. There's a distinct cutoff around here. Again, it's coming down here. Now what we're going to look at is the non-radiating boundary. And I've talked about this before, that there is, in my view, an inner one that comes to this point where the Sothic triangle intersects with this circle. And the outer one is where this lower circle intersects with the large circle. So first up, we have the inner circle here. And then we have the outer circle here. And the interesting part about this is, if we go back and forth between the image without the circles on there and the circles present, you see from about here, the inner and outer circles are essentially in line with this boundary ridge. This boundary ridge that's going all the way around here. Okay? It departs down here. Now, this is not a surprise because our tornado is coming out of here. Okay? The tornado is coming out of here, and that will pull this plasmoid structure into the witness material first. Okay? And so you will get a stretching out of the interaction of the outer shell with the material. And examples that I can give for this are from Binzhuan Huang, where the tornado interacted with the copper and stripped this increasingly large section out. And I describe this as saying that, like, we've got our torus here, and it's not coming like that. It's not coming down on the surface directly down like that. It's not coming slap onto the surface like that. It has the tornado, and the tornado is touching down and it's pulling it into the surface, so it then crashes onto the surface. Okay? So I think that's what's going on in the left-hand image here in Binzhuan Huang's reactor. And I'm liking that to the touchdown of this area first, resulting in the slight distortion of the boundary area here. It's still flat here, because this is where the tornado is coming out of, this zone here. But otherwise it's more circular. Another example would be this, where the large 48 torr structure in the John Hutchison fracture sample, it came in, and this isn't quite a perfect circle because it's coming in at an angle and crashing in there. We had the same thing, but from the side, again in Binzhuan Huang, it's come in from the side here. And if we go through the images here, you can see it's distorted and left that kind of like skull shape off to one side as it crashed in to the surface. Or maybe it came in this side or whatever. It's crashed in from one side. And it broke up and spat out its guts here that were in here. And then that gut spat out its guts over here and over here. Okay, so there's a couple of examples that would explain what we see here. But I believe that this is caused by a magnetohydrodynamic structure, and it's very well represented in their artwork. So for me, I didn't know this existed, but I thank the team at the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. This is a very, very nice piece of data supporting the overall hypothesis. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. If the local electron number density in the shell, at least, on the outer magnetic surface reaches a value higher than that in a solid, 10 to the 24 to centimeter cubed. So what they are arguing here is that this shell, this outer shell, or any component of it, has an electron density higher than ordinary matter for the average number density over the entire volume of the toroid, which is formed by the components of the cluster at the level of the above example, we can explain the emergence of tracks on the surface over which the cluster moves, as well as the presence of atoms and molecules of the substrate substance in it. Now, this whole paper does not discuss transmutation. What they discuss is atoms are captured by this thing, and they're captured by it because the electron density on this magnetic shell is so high that it's higher than in all ordinary matter. And this is essentially the same kind of thing that Ken Shoulders was saying. You end up with material that has higher binding energy, and so it does novel nuclear reactions. But in this paper, there is no mention of transmutation. They are just saying what is observed and giving reasons for where things and how things can be moved around. Okay? But they are giving this statement that if we assume that the local electron density is higher, then we can suggest that that is a reason why it would be causing damage to the surface and capture of atoms from it. The direction and velocity of motion of the cluster must be determined by the presence of external fields, electric and magnetic fields, including the Earth's fields, as well as by intrinsic hydrodynamic mechanisms, as well as by intrinsic hydrodynamic mechanisms, like the response to the interaction of electrons with the substance. So basically, what they're saying is that this would move along because there's a hydrodynamic structure that is causing it to move along. And I would agree. That's exactly what I would say. And that is exactly what we have observed in so many systems. Okay? So the first one here is, this is a confirmation of Ken Shoulders' claims. Second one here is that the movement is also claimed by hydrodynamics. That's magnetohydrodynamics. And then it says here, like the response of the interaction of electrons with the substance, many characteristic traces of interaction of such objects were detected after eating away of atoms of the substance. Cooling and condensation of the substance in the form of spherical objects with a structure resembling an orange shell, often with a downward hole in the axis. What? Right, so at Sochi, I showed this 20 micron channel that had been consumed over a very large number of centimeters in the Lion 1 reactor. And along its channel, it consumed this beautiful chunk of material, and every so often it had left these spherical or polyhedral structures that appeared to have been ejected from the structure as I imagined it. And I described it in the presentation as right? And this was given before this paper was published. So they have come to a very, very similar consideration. They're saying it's a magnetohydrodynamic structure. They are saying that it has electron densities on the magnetic shell that is higher than that of ordinary matter. And as a result, it's able to both move through, leave tracks, and consume matter of the substance on which it is traveling. This is highly, highly significant considerations that they are making here. But it's this last point that they have made here, that after eating away of atoms of the substance, cooling and condensation of the substance in the form of spherical objects with a structure resembling the orange shell, often with a downward hole on the axis. This got me a little bit excited. And why was that? It's because of this. Boom! Yes, they have a crenelated microsphere in their work. Crenelated microsphere. I have a close-up on it here in a second. If I go here, there. That is your crenelated microsphere, and this is the hole on the axis to which they refer. Okay? So here is a crenelated microsphere, one of several, there's two more here, in the work of Henkurian, which I imaged from the Vega reactor. This is one such example. You can have ones with HHO gas on carbon producing silicon spheres, again with the hole at the end. And this is the pole. And they are saying that this pole is on the axis. So essentially what I am arguing is that they have observed exactly what we have observed. This here, thank you very much, Vanilla Isis. Thank you very much. Yes, this is amazing, this paper, because it nails the fact that these structures can be long-lived. It nails that this is the point at which material comes in. In my view, the material comes out again. Okay, it is definitely being sucked in here, and when this structure breaks, it's spewing it out in a tornado here. Okay, we can see in the Hutchison effect, it's literally being pulled into the center of the torus here, through the center of the torus, through the center of the torus, through the center of the torus at different fractal levels. Okay, so it is, in my view, the same thing that is going on in these firenados. The same thing that is going on in the wind hex, because whether Frank Polifka knew it or not, he had effectively studied nature to the point at which he got the geometry absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Okay? And it has one answer. Nature has one answer. And this is a plasma structure with a magnetohydrodynamic structure. And here is a plasma structure with a magnetohydrodynamic structure. This is a plasma structure here with a magnetohydrodynamic structure that left these imprints and substructures thereof that have the same in them. And they make spheres. Now the argument question is the sphere the magnetic core or the overall structure? It doesn't really matter because it's fractal. So I would argue that this sphere here it's eaten material, and then when it's cooled, it's left the material that came from the core or one of the subtor cores. Now they don't analyze this to say whether it's iron, but you can see that it might be. Of course, we know from the work of Matsumoto that it can actually be other materials here, okay? And in the case of this one, it was lead because he was using lead wires. He used other materials, and it was other elements from the system, okay? So this is utterly beautiful to me. One, without knowing it, they verified the magnetohydrodynamic structure and the non-radiating boundary. And without knowing it, they've not only cooled the thing that consumes matter because of extreme electron densities and the magnetic monopole, that it has the means to produce these, what they call orange peel, which is not a bad description, spheres, which have a hole in one side, and this is exactly what we have observed. This is the point at which You have to be exercising the Semmelweis reflex to not believe that there is O. You have to be exercising it. It's got to the point of absurd levels of extraordinary proof. Absurd levels of extraordinary proof. But it's going to get a lot better. I have some real treats for you tonight. This was just the warm-up act. Okay, we'll just finish off the nice parts of this paper. Right. So at the end here, it says here, often with a downward hole on the axis. Absolutely exactly the same as my observations across many different systems. It presumably occurs, the photograph shows two objects detected on the substrate in the after discharge period. A ball of the above described type and a filament with the same diameter as that of the ball. Now this is very interesting because it's not something I'd actually clocked before, but they have a different reason for it, and I don't think necessarily I agree with it, but this is a fairly similar diameter, but not the same diameter. But we do get other ones that are the same diameter, but maybe it's just circumstance in their part. More data, will finalize these things. The length of such filaments can reach a few centimeters. As a rule, the filaments consist of the same substance as the substrate and oxygen. In some cases, filaments contain carbon. Its presence can be explained by the sputtering of the graphite electrode. See, what they do in this paper is they go to great lengths to avoid mention of any transmutation. Okay? And if they've got carbon in there, they can say, well, okay, the carbon came from there. Okay, but in our experiments, we've literally seen these elements being born out of the inside of structures, as we see here. This carbon is coming outside of here, but also this titanium, which is carbon and oxygen fused together in the ratio of CO2, that is being ejected from here in these two tori. Okay. As a rule, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So they have this schematic for how the plasmoid forms, which is interesting. And they have this traces on a copper plate after the termination of a cessation. At the end of the ditch, a lump of the same material is seen. So this is the material that's being captured from the copper plate. I guess this is copper oxide looking at the shape of it. So that's their ball spherical new formation and a filament on the blade surface after the plasma discharge liquid flow near the substrate. Okay. These are long-lived filaments, these long things here, luminous filaments in the zone. This is a filament with a ball at the end, so it's a ball at the end and filaments. Matsumoto saw these things. Here is a track, a caterpillar track, ditch on the copper sample subjected to action of plasma discharge liquid flow in the form of caterpillar. The composition is copper plus oxygen. Okay. The origin of these filaments can be connected with the same processes that lead to the formation of the balls, namely the formation of plasma filaments during the discharge. So these are the plasma filaments, and they're saying that these filaments here, which can be carbon, are formed. But what they have not seen is what we saw in our work, which I shared at ICMNS, is that the plasma the filaments are actually kind of like bound between material. In fact, I haven't got it in this set of images, which I was going to show you. No, it's not there. If you can recall the two structures from the work of have I got it here? Maybe. I don't know. No, I don't know whether I have. The two structures like these, but they were more broken up and you saw the filaments going between them. Anyway, whatever. Followed by the concentration of the observed vapor of evaporated metal of high voltage electrodes, metal and graphite. Linear plasmoids have one or two luminescent ends. In the former case, the second end reaches the surface. In some cases, luminous filaments exist for a few seconds, changing their shape insignificantly. Okay, in other works, they have said that the ends of the filaments are monopoles. Okay, and I have suggested that this is what we saw on the coming out of the thunderstorm generator video by Malcolm Bendel. Okay. A theoretical substantiation of the possibility of the existence of stable formation of this type was given in this paper, which we've discussed in the past. The glow of the ends may indicate the existence of magnetic poles. So there we go. They're saying it again there. Okay. So you've got one pole at one end, one pole at the other, and a flux loop between them, and the flux loop is glowing. That is what I'm saying was what we saw on Malcolm Bendel's thunderstorm generator that he took a video of about eight and a bit years ago now in Thailand. In the after discharge period, the formation of such filaments could be considered analogously to the formation of balls, namely an active cluster that emerges on the surface as a plasmoid with subsequent moving over the surface and eating away of atoms of the substrate material. At the end of the track, this substance is formed in this case not as a ball, but as a filament, or a filament with a ball at its end. Figure 9. Like this one. I actually think he does refer to, I don't know, does he refer? So there's Jiggaloff, which I was talking about earlier. Dirac monopole. No, it doesn't refer to Matsumoto, but I think they do in one of the references of this. The specific shape of ditches or tracks after the motion of plasmoids over the metal surface is the same in some cases as the shape of ditches left by a fireball. Boom! That's a ball lightning right there. On the surface of a metal construction, which indicates the possibility of generalization of laboratory results to natural phenomena. So what they are saying is that the shape of the ditches left by ball lightning on the surface of a metal construction, figure 10 here, is similar to that which occurs naturally, effectively. So essentially they are saying that whatever is doing this, and whatever is doing this, and whatever is doing this, and whatever is doing this is related to natural phenomena. I would agree. Generalizing analysis of experimental results obtained during the study of high current pinch and arc discharges occurring in the pulsed mode on the surface of water jet and in the ambient at electrode voltage of several kilovolts has made it possible to construct phenomenological model of a multi-cascade process, including the after-discharge period. It has been established that long-lived plasmoids of different types with spherical, filamentary, and other configurations appear in the ambient space. Of special interest are the objects, luminescent plasmoids, appearing on the surface and subjected to the action of the discharge, which can move and leave scratches. Their presence can be detected during the session between discharge pulses as well as after quite long time intervals. Glowing plasmoids can move in air over distances of up to several tens of centimeters from the discharge. Metal and dielectric surfaces acquire a large number of tracks with specific configuration and with different shapes. The construction of the model of a plasmoid based on electrons, ions, and neutral atoms and molecules makes it possible to substantiate the existence of stable state for a certain value of parameters, number, density of charges, size and mass of plasmoids, etc. Such a theory was formerly based on the gravitation model in the general theory of relativity. In this study, it was proposed that an insignificant amount of a very important component, magnetic charges, in the ionization volume is the decisive factor responsible for the entire aggregate of phenomena and processes described here. I.e., if you do not have these magnetic monopoles, you do not get this kind of action. It is absolutely necessary for the observed effects. Their formation can be associated with the ionization of initially neutral in electric and magnetic charges molecules, e.g. of hydrogen, so H2, or O2, or N2, which after ionization forms pairs of so-called Dions, predicted theoretically almost a century ago by Paul Dirac et al. After the separation of these components in external fields, plasmoids with unique properties inherent in particular in elementary magnetic charges, namely the formation of the electron trail of the macroscopic size, can appear in the plasmoid localization region with a high enough plasmoid concentration. Evidence of the emergence of such trails can be found in the results of X-ray diffraction analysis of not only discharges in the water jet, but also in X-ray films in the vicinity of the region of ionization of air by bremsstrahlung in accelerators operating at different energies from units to hundreds of mega electron volts. An argument supporting this model is the presence of glowing plasmoids with an ellipsoidal cross-section and presumably toroidal shape, which rotate about their axis. This follows from the displacement of opaque part of the toroid, top view, through the microscope objective. The formation of ditches after the passage of an object can be associated more logically with eating away of the substrate atoms by the toroidal shell that is presumably formed by electrons participating in infinite motion in the magnetic field of a dipole formed by magnetic charges together with the electron trail. And that's essentially what I showed in Sochi. The dynamics of an electron in the field of a monopole was studied by Dirac, who predicted the positron and monopole and who studied their properties theoretically. A large number of spherical objects pinched along their axis, which are detected after the discharge on surfaces with tracks, ditches, may serve as a material evidence in the substantiation of the given hypothesis. These objects are considered cooled plasmoids with the symmetry axis coinciding with the rotation axis. So basically, I shared an image with them from, and you can go and look at the Sochi presentation images. It was with Berkmekatova. She did a presentation on ball lightning. I showed a slide that I hadn't included in the 1/3 of the O-Day slides that I shared with them on that day. I shared an additional slide, and it showed the iron-rich crenelated spheres that we had produced in the NOVA reactor. It showed ones on crop circles, 3 on a head of corn, and 3 that had been deposited on with the first of the spheres half in the fused quartz on the Lion reactor. So there was 3, and they were dropping down in size, but they were magnetically linked together. So I had shared that at that presentation, and they're saying here that this material is being dumped out. And so I would imagine that when you look at those things on the Henk Uren, when a ball lightning is breaking up, you can imagine a ball lightning is moving away, and it's breaking up, and small iron-rich crenelated spheres are being dumped behind it. So I think something like that is going on. May serve as a material evidence in the substantiation of the given hypothesis. These objects are considered cooled plasmoids with the symmetry axis coinciding with the rotation axis. Filaments of substrate material coated with an oxygen-carbon shell can be treated as objects of the same type. And so the fact that we have these hexagonal and pentagonal structures on the inside of the outside of the 24-inch sphere of Malcolm Bendel. I'm saying that that is where one of the plasmoids is, one of the ends of the plasmoids is. And in the outside of that, you get the carbon, and on the inside, you get the iron-rich crenelated sphere, which they're calling a orange peel type structure. It is the same thing. It is the same thing. 100% Malcolm has those, and it is ball lightning, and it is this fractal toroidal geometry. Their existence is explained, in particular, by the fixation of luminous filaments on the film during the discharge, as well as between discharge pulses for a few seconds. Now, read this. The results of this study can be useful for describing natural phenomena such as thunderstorms and tornadoes. Boom! Because the conditions in which such processes occur and the results may be of the same origin and consequences, e.g., fireball, ball lightning. Okay? There we go. Little fish, is the Earth's core a black hole? It might be what a black hole really is. It might be what a black hole really is, which is fractal toroidal phase singularity. The problem of ensuring safety for the environment of technological processes and for consumers of its products is especially topical. In the latter case, it can be a contact of the process surface with the cutinous covering of the worker. If the plasma discharge liquid flow processing is not the final stage of the process, it is of no danger because the surface layer is removed by grinding and polishing, as well as by strain hardening with polishing, and go to waste, where the affected magnetic charges is negligibly small. If magnetic charges are present in air because of forced ventilation required for reducing the concentration of electrolysis products to the required level, in view of the possible formation of detonating gas, their concentration is scanty. So basically they're saying, like, if the process automatically removes through polishing the deposited monopoles, or if there's proper ventilation in the environment which is doing this processing, then it should be okay. However, new formations in the form of little birds obtained as a result of analogous processes in analogous areas, e.g. in accelerators, may be important because the effect of such objects in the case of high concentrations in air, as is the case with accelerators, has not been studied comprehensively and requires additional investigation. So they're basically saying there could be risk of exposure to this monopole-dependent radiation around accelerators. And that, my friends, is where we're going to go next in this presentation. So, have you got any questions at this point? If not, I will then move on to the next part of the presentation. Hi, Martin. Great to have you here. Hi, Arthur. Hi, Electro Samurai. Hi, Little Fish Mickey. Hi, Ian McClelland. Great to have you here. Corky Goss is in the house. DIY projects with Chauxis. Yes, we've got from all parts of the world here. JK Philly fan. It's fantastic to have you here. Bo Grizzly from Thought. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Joe Vellecci. Thoth the Atlantean. Mela Fury. Some new people in the house. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Okay. Any questions? Bob, this magnetic pinching of material surfaces is like shot peening, introduce residual compressive stress. I actually think it's changing the structure of the atoms in there, and the electric properties, and it resists corrosion. So JK Feely fan says, in your MHD model, is the Fresnel zone significant in this process? Well, Fresnel is sort of like the boundary when you're looking at it through the thickness, because when you're looking at say a bubble, a a soap bubble, when you look through the perpendicular, you're only seeing the thickness of the soap bubble. But if you look on the boundary, you can see a lot more of the thickness, and so you actually see the boundary. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? Specifically, does the almond-shaped horizontal region play a role, or is this a feature unique to constructive destructive? The almond shape is the Vesica pisces, I think you're referring to, is where you get a bit of constructive destructive interference. So you've got like, this is coming this way, it's coming this way. There's the zones of increased and decreased intensity in there. I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. I don't know whether Maxwell's original theory caught gravity, but what I can tell you for certain is these structures can allow for a propulsion device, which obviously naturally would lead you to something that you can use to work against gravity. You just need to look at the updraft that you're seeing here. And as I've argued, when we pull in the fractal geometry, our craft needs to be sitting here. And in that point, you have a flux that's coming through. And if you have sufficient flux, it's going to counter all of this flux it's kind of like pushing up. Okay, and we're going to talk about this more in the second part of the presentation tonight on a very different paper. It's two papers actually, one presentation and one paper. I do know Meta Ubuntu about the sacred toroidal stones of Michael Tellinger. In fact, I have his book over here somewhere. Maybe, do I? I thought I did. Yeah, I have it over here. Give me a second. Oh, no, that's not it. This is it. Yeah. Give me a second. Right. Let's try this. I think you're meaning this book, possibly. Temples of the African Gods. Somewhere in here. It might have it in here. I think it does. I think it's got some pictures of those things. Maybe you've got a page number you can give me. I don't see it. Oh, there. Maybe that's it. Right here. We've got some tools at the end here. There we go. Tools. Ringy stones. Not seeing it immediately. Maybe he puts that in a different book. All right. Oh yeah, I've got some nice books to share with you this year. Yeah, there's From Thoughts talking about the corona. I've talked about the temperature of the corona and the surface. I think what's happening is you're getting evos formed on the Earth, and then you have these magnetic flux loops, and then when the evos break up, the atoms within them have been completely stripped or very, very highly ionized. And what happens is they have to regain electrons from the environment, and that's part of the reason you've got this constant flux of electrons coming to the sun. And when you take an ion atom and you remove a lot of electrons, you then have electrons that come down and they produce photons that look like it's at millions of degrees. because you would have to raise the temperature of iron, for instance, to millions of degrees to be able to get photons of that energy. But it's caused by the EVO process. So the color temperature is at millions of degrees, but it's not a thermal process that's getting it that hot, if you know what I mean. I have a different view to the mainstream in that respect. Metafury says, Bob, can you explain later about chi life force or point me to where you might have explained this? I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the second part of the presentation tonight. But yeah, it's a much bigger topic, and I have discussed it quite a few times. I can't remember offhand immediately because it's spread across different. We do need chi, and I think you're going to see that there is something that is chi-like, and in fact it is. You're going to like this next part. Right, so in summary of the first part of the presentation, Agent Smith is trying to force you to not see what you can see with your own eyes. He's trying to convince you that you need to channel your internal Semmelweis reflex and reject all of the evidence that nature is showing you here, okay, and here, and to ignore what they shared in this paper, where an impact of a plasmoid produced this shape, which is the same thing, and they also saw the iron-rich crenelated spheres with the hole along the axis in the direction of travel, opposite to the direction of travel. Okay, you have to use the Semmelweis reflex to believe in yourself. And I think the money shots in this is really that they are saying what I've been saying for so long. The shape of the ditches left by the fireball on the surface of the metal construction, which indicates the possibility of generalization of laboratory results to natural phenomena. Yes, you can be mocked to say, oh, this isn't what's going on, but this is scale invariant, these processes. The results of this study can be useful for describing natural phenomena such as thunderstorms and tornadoes, and I would also suggest firenadoes, because the conditions in which such processes occur and the results may be of the same origin and consequences, e.g. a fireball, microball lightning, ball lightning. Okay, which means that these structures, which have been referred to as static electricity, are reliant on magnetic monopole type structures, magnetic charges. Okay, so now I will bring up a very different kind of part to this. It's in here. Now, I've been translating a presentation, and it's been quite satisfying personally the last couple of years, because people that I greatly respect are starting to draw upon the body of physical evidence that we have shared over the last several years, coming out of works from the likes of Binzhuan Huang and the Vega experiments of Henk Uren and David Whittier. And you're going to see that a presentation that I was sent last year and then was presented at the Russian conference has then forced Shishkin to slightly adjust his theory, and he's now using the model, which is kind of like a simplified model of what I'm talking about, but it is specifically referring to etheric vortice structures and toroidal vortice structures. Okay, so it's going to be very, very obvious to even the most stubborn of stick in the mud that this is how nature is doing things. Okay, so Alexander Shishkin, who I consider a friend, has sent me this. Actually, Alexander Parkhomov, who's nearly 80, he's approaching his 80th birthday now, sent me a summary of his experience in cold fusion and has given me permission to translate it. So I will be doing that at some point, not until I've done the Matsumoto book, which is, thank you for all of those that made that possible. You can still get some rewards if you want to. Go to the Kickstarter for that. But anyway, he sent me this paper here, which we are going to look at, and I have spent a bit of time translating it here. And he's generalizing radiation exposure because he thinks that the thing that we are referring to as strange radiation is a component of actual ordinary radiation. And I think he makes a very good case for that being true. So a phenomenological model of radiation exposure. This will be a remote view blog once I finish translating it. During the 1960s and 1970s, it was recognized that workers in certain industries, and I know there's some welders out there, so listen up, like welding, suffered from health conditions similar to those experienced by people working with radiation, that is, traditional forms of radioactive materials, nuclear reactors, and so forth. But how can we explain the usefulness of uranium-235 tablets that were widely used in medicine in the 20s and 30s of the last century? I didn't actually know that that was the case, but apparently they were used with good effect. In 2010, a new type of penetrating radiation was experimentally registered using photoemulsion detectors. The smallest units or quanta of this unidentified radiation form a dynamic, closed toroidal donut-shaped vortex structure. This structure is composed of elements from the primordial matter known as ether. In experimental work, 3 components of the spectrum of ether solitons, sorry, I'm going to get my A in there, were registered. Low energy solitons, LES, medium energy solitons, MES, and high energy solitons, HES. It was found in 3 and 4 that high energy solitons have no charge, and some of them have magnetic properties. Okay, so they can be chargeless and have magnetic properties. Okay, some of them. Okay. In this study, the author has attempted to create a theoretical structure for understanding how ether solitons are formed and what their radiation effects are on matter, including humans. This is extremely important, what I'm about to share with you. This is absolutely groundbreaking, cutting-edge stuff. Okay? And thank you, Alan Goldwater. Magic Sound is in the house. Okay, mechanism of soliton generation. At the end of the 28th Russian Conference on Cold Transmutation of Nuclei of Chemical Elements and Ball Lightning, 2024, the author has revised the model of the atom and the magnetotoroelectrical radiation as described in references 1, 2, and 5. In the work of 6, cited figure 6, the etherodynamic model of the proton is described as a toroidal ring ether formation with a clearly expressed spin jet, red arrow characterized by pumping of an etheric flow through its central zone, the first attached vortex, the size of which exceeds the size of a proton by 5 orders of magnitude. The spin jet is the true, real spin of elementary particles and atoms as etheric vortex formations, starting with the proton, whose properties determine all properties in NMR processes and in chemical reactions. Everything is determined by the spin architecture of molecules. Now, what is he referring to? He's referring to this diagram. Right, this diagram comes from this paper reference down here, which we will look at. 6, which doesn't make a lot of sense to you here, but what I have is a presentation here Now, this was originally sent to me by Avsharov here. In fact, it was sent to me here by Avsharov earlier last year. And he felt he had a massive breakthrough as a result of the findings that we had in flux capacitor, the video session that I recorded in Alan Goldwater's Magic Sound Lab. And he shows these various, well, firstly, he shows this crumb image here, which he says crim, but anyway, crumb. And he makes the correct shape, in my view, of how this collapsing bubble is caused by an etheric vortex in here. I completely agree with that. What he did was he made an assumption about the flow coming out of here, and it's actually going in. And I said they're going the wrong way, but he didn't correct it before the Russian conference last year. So I need to work with him to correct that. But, you know, it's only ever going to be one way or the other. But what he's showing actually here, and we're going to delve into this, is his model of the proton. Okay? And I am arguing that the structures that form these are effectively, this is a vacuum object. The proton is a vacuum object. Okay? An etheric vortice. This, on the substrate of copper in the Binge-Huang reactor, is an exotic vacuum object. An object and an exotic vacuum object. Okay? Again, here he's made the wrong assumption about it spewing out from the top. Well, it could be, because we can't see into here. Actually, it could be spewing out from the top. But my suspicion is that it's always coming out from the bottom of a structure. I'm less wedded to that than I am that this is the in and this is the out. Okay, because of the way these travel. And the reason is that one that I showed you earlier, where we know that it's traveling in a particular direction. In fact, the two ones. This one, we know that it's traveling in this direction. This is where it died, and it put an increasing channel. So it's sucking in, and this is the out of the vortex there. And then the other one that shows this essentially is, well, in this case, obviously it's traveled in this direction. Okay, it didn't travel there and then skip back there. So it's ejecting from the area in which it pulls material in, and this is effectively also here. The material is pulled in here. This is the operating structure, and when it dies, there's the back pressure, and it just pushes it back out. That's my view, and I'm going to stick to it just for now. Right, so he's done all this, but unfortunately, I'm just showing you what I consider needs to be worked on a little bit more. But I'm going to go to his presentation now, because I think it's very, very important. It's very, very important to understand what I'm going to show you with Shishkin's update. But what I'm saying, that the fact that Alan Goldwater took it upon himself to spend his own money and get an SEM, and the fact that Binge-Huang had the courage to entrust me with some of his samples, the combination of those two acts and a little bit of time and support from you guys to analyze those things has produced data that has to be explained. It has to be explained. And in the case the first of the presentations I'm going to show you here, or sections of it, because I haven't translated all of it, it completely solidified in his mind the ethereal vortice model of nature. And the argument was so strong with that physical evidence captured in Alan Goldwater's Magic Sound Lab that it's changed one of the leading Russian scientists. This is the scientist that when I went to the conferences, when he was talking about something, all of the other Russian scientists would gather around him hoping for tidbits, listening intently. And these are the top notch people that used to work in their lives at the all Russian nuclear facility in Dubna. These are the top of the game. And Shishkin worked directly for many years with Vladimir Dubovik, right up until his death. And Dubovik, of course, is the discoverer of the very real toroidal moment. And by the way, just recently, an international team has proven that nickel-58, the most abundant isotope of nickel in nickel, has a toroidal moment. And so all nuclei should have a toroidal moment, but or at least an anapole moment in the case of a proton. But it's now absolutely certain. Okay, so we're going to look at this, and I think it's very valuable to look at it. Okay. All right, I'm actually going to go full screen and just see if we can get this a little bit bigger here. Let's play this, actually. Okay. I was going to translate, is it? No, I'm going to kill that. No. A thermodynamic model or ether dynamic model of basic elements of the material world. You can go and see it on this link. It's worth having a look into this guy's work. So, the modeled etherodynamic representation of the proton as a spin toroid, which has comparable toroidal and annular rotations. So, it has comparable toroidal and annular rotations. Okay. This means it's slightly stretched out, and it becomes more of a sphere overall with its overall large boundary layer, which is comparable to toroidal and annular rotations with a powerful longitudinal ejection and rotation of the ether inside the barrel as a solid body, so-called spin jet. So this is the spin jet that's coming out that that was being referred to by Shishkin. The neutron, however, does not have a comparable annular rotation. So the model representation of the neutron as a rotation toroid having a predominantly toroidal rotation, so toroidal here. I would call this poloidal, but anyway. And they haven't got the with virtually zero annular rotation. So there's no rotation round this way. So you don't, I guess that's what's giving the charge. With ejection of ether inside the spin jet trunk with its predominant rotation as a solid body. So you still get the spin jet, whether you're in a neutron or a proton. The neutron, born as an unstable rotating object whose toroidal etheric flow continues to twist and compress itself, turning into a stable proton with the ejection of excess etheric mass into an etheric electron and the residue dispersed by unstable etheric vortices, and I guess that would be into the form of a neutrino. Okay, so I think this is an electron being ejected here. From the neutron, maybe, yeah. So this basically moves to this because outside of the nuclei, it falls apart and becomes a stable proton and a stable electron and an antineutrino. Okay. Now this is utterly fascinating because this is using a mainstream Nature journal, which is quite recent, that was done at Stanford Linear Accelerator. And what it's showing here is by bombarding protons with electrons here, so they've got these electrons, which he's also showing that they're etheric vortices. He's shooting these, or rather the Stanford Linear Accelerator is shooting these at a proton. And what you've got here is the graph of the spatial distribution of pressure on the surface of the proton from the axis to the periphery corresponds to the distribution of ether fluxes on the suction side at the end of its toroidal body of rotation on its periphery. The failure of the graph to the minimum value along the symmetry axis corresponds to the region of suction of the toroid, which cannot be explained in the standard model of electrodynamics. So yeah, if a proton is just a point source, I don't know. Anyway, the point is it's able to suck stuff in here, and it's zero at this point. And you can see the pressure. This, I think, is going to be a very, very important graph as we go ahead. I haven't overlaid my model on this, but I suspect that where this reaches down back to zero here, that will be effectively at the non-radiating boundary. So I'm going to do some rough sketches up of what that looks like. But before I go there, I'm going to, well, not now, but at some point, I'm going to show you the actual paper that is by Burkert, and it's in Nature Letters here. This is its DOI number here. There we go, for those that want to go and have a look. And I will put this link in. But essentially, the pressure distribution inside the proton. Okay. The proton, one of the components of atomic nuclei, is composed of fundamental particles called quarks and gluons. Gluons are the carriers of force that binds quarks together, and free quarks are never found in isolation. That is, they are confined within the composite particle in which they reside. The origin of quark confinement is one of the most important questions in modern particle and nuclear physics, because confinement is at the core of what makes the proton a stable particle and thus provides stability to the universe. The internal quark structure of the proton is revealed by deeply virtual Compton scattering, a process in which electrons are scattered off quarks inside the protons, which subsequently emit high-energy photons, which are detected in coincidence with the scattered electrons and recoil protons. Here we report measurement of the pressure distribution experienced by the quarks in the proton. We find a strong repulsive pressure near the center of the proton, up to 6 femtometers, and a binding pressure at greater distances. The average peak pressure near the center is about 10 to the 35 pascals, which exceeds the pressure estimated for the most densely packed known objects in the universe, neutron stars. This work opens up a new area of research on the fundamental gravitational properties of protons, neutrons, and nuclei, which can provide access to their physical radii, the initial internal shear forces acting on quarks, and their pressure distributions. But here is the chart which he has taken, and essentially there's 3 areas here which we're going to look at later, but it's based on the initial test was here, the new test is something like here, and this is the error bars, and they're going to get within this orange band in terms of certainty. Okay. But you can imagine that if there's etheric flow moving around here, and we know that the ball lightning is a macro exotic vacuum object, it's effectively like a big version of this. If it's moving flow around and the pressure variation is similar, we could look at this chart and derive why things move in a particular direction, and why, if you were to create a propulsion system by using or manifesting a macro version of how an individual a normal vacuum object like a proton is formed, then you could end up leveraging this etheric pressure variation to produce propulsion, which would be a propulsion that would be useful not just against gravity, but at any point in the universe. Okay, so your attached etheric vortices, your first order, I think, is this internal one, and then you've got this external one on the outside. And, you know, this looks a lot like my model, but it's kind of like more schematic based rather than driven by experimental observation. Okay, so I'm going to, we're going to go play from current slide. Okay. So they've got this other one here, and he's saying that when you get to a proton, it actually has this second etheric shell that approximates a sphere, but we've seen these kind of structures in our experiments, and you can see that this is the spin jet that's coming out. Now, this is very, very interesting to me, because if you recall, I said many moons ago that in a David Boutelier experiment, I observed these exotic vacuum objects moving around the forward projected position of where one is traveling. And I'm actually going to do a video mapping out, I've only got 3 frames, but I can map out the paths because it's showing the trace of the length of the frame of the movement of these things. So it will be absolutely totally clear to people what is going on in that sequence of images. But I said that there's some spin beam that's coming out of the front of an exotic vacuum object, which is causing another exotic vacuum object, when it comes within the event horizon of that, to orbit around it and change its direction. And that is what I've said. That's what I've said consistently. And this work now, in my view, the spin jet that's coming out exactly and precisely matches that. So again here, the black line here corresponds to the pressure obtained from the time parameters corresponding to the published data in that 2018 paper from Stanford Linear Accelerator. The green area here represents the uncertainties. The blue area here, the green area represents the uncertainties. Blue area, uncertainties from all data available before the experiment at 6 gigaelectron volts. The red area here shows the projected results of a future experiments at 12 gigaelectron volts to be performed with the upgraded facility. So they're hoping to get it refined down to here, but essentially the black line is going to be roughly in the same position. So you can get an idea of how the vortices work around it. Okay. The shape of the proton's ether streams, which is more consistent with its ether dynamic model, is close in shape to the intensity of ethereomagnetic field of radiation from the dipole antenna. So this is the magnetic field from a dipole antenna, and he's saying that basically it's very similar to that. And, you know, it really does look a lot like what we were looking at in the impact mark on the electrode. Okay, in the previous work by Bogdanovich et al., or rather at Nestorovich, or whatever his name is. Sorry. Okay, and he's also got this, which is the pressure changes within the proton's axis of symmetry. And down here, you've got 10 to the 20 kilograms per meter squared. It's a lot of pressure. But up here, it's 10 to the 34 kilograms per meter squared. That is a lot of pressure right up there. So yes, I think this is more pressure than you get inside, or at least equivalent to the pressure you get inside a neutron star. Now he's taking a section along one side of it, graph of the change of the internal pressure of the ether in proton along the cross-section A to A. So this cross-section A to A, and he's taken one side of that. I didn't want to do that. What have I done here? Depending on the velocities of the ether motion on the rotation surfaces of the ether medium, in the center along the axis, ether pressure, oh dear, I'll need to change that as well, is strongly reduced. The motion is predominantly longitudinal with superluminal velocities and no rotation as a solid body in the form of an outward spin jet. So there's a jet coming out here, superluminal, but it's a spin jet. Okay? In the center of the toroidal ring ether vortex, the ether flows have maximum longitudinal velocity and reduced circular rotation, which organized what should be correctly interpreted as a spin jet, which has a determining influence on the interaction with the surrounding ether and material environment. The ether movement inside the spin jet body region occurs as a solid body, analogous to the mechanism of ether flow processes in the trunk of an atmospheric tornado. So he's done the graphs here, and he's saying it's basically the same as you see in a tornado. Yet another person is making this correlation, and I think rightly so. Now, I haven't studied this deeply, and I'm going to, but you can see here, this is the change in internal pressure, and you can see the pressures. If this is going up in pressure, then it's lower pressure here, higher pressure here, and lower pressure here. Could this account for the motion of an exotic vacuum object, which is not a proton, but it's something like a proton, but in a macro form, having a hydrodynamic force forcing it through the medium, but still being a normal vacuum-like object ejecting a spin jet out in front of it? I think so. I think it fits all of the data that I've shared with you over the past several years. Here is the detector he's made. This is very interesting. We need to be thinking about this. I will translate this slide. Here's the crumb photo again. And then I've corrected some of these images so that the vortex is coming in the right place. And there is his sketch. So these are the work of Binder and Huang. And so this work in combination, sorry, this author's work in combination with my work with Binder and Huang at Alan Goldwater's lab was sufficient to convince Alexander Shishkin, who worked with Dubovik, to reconsider his thinking of how the solitons are formed. So he's taken this from the paper that I've just been reading you from Avsharov here, this paper here. And he's saying traces, I'll go back up to where we got to. How did we get to? Okay. In the work Fig 6, that's what we've been looking at, this diagram here. Okay. Etherodynamic model of the proton is described as a toroidal ring ether formation with a clearly expressed spin jet. So now you know what this red arrow is. This is the spin jet that comes out. This is what I think is being the cause of the orbiting of these EVOs in the David Boulier experiment. Characterized by the pumping of etheric flow through its central zone, the first attached vortex, the size of which exceeds the size of a proton by 5 orders of magnitude. The spin jet is the true, real spin of elementary particles and atoms as etheric vortex formations, starting with the proton, whose properties determine all properties in NMR processes, nuclear magnetic resonance processes, and in chemical reactions. Everything is determined by the spin architecture of molecules. When an electron is attached, a hydrogen atom is born with an outer shell of the atom from the elements of ether flow, the second attached vortex. So let's go back to that. Where is it? Come on. So the main vortex is in the center. Here, this is the main toroidal vortex, but this produces this much larger structure, which is more spherical and more like an apple, overall apple shape. And that is the shell of etheric flow around which the electron participates. In case of critical impact on the atom shell, due to its elastic forces, the nucleus detaches from the shell along the vector inverse to the spin jet. The nucleus detaches from the shell along the vector inverse to the spin jet. So if the spin jet is coming out here, then the nucleus will be knocked out this way. Okay, that's what he's saying. In this case, the shell in the form of a soliton or spin jet flies away in the opposite direction from the nucleus. The spin jet, SJ, flies away apparently in the form of a rotating string. Now, he's talked about these things can be 700 meters long with an energy of tens of mega electron volts. In my judgment, this is Shishkin's judgment, It is the rotating string that leaves a microcrater on the surface it hits. Now, he's saying that you can have a spin jet with a soliton. And in the past, he called it a string vortex soliton. So the rotating string is one component, and that can come out by itself as a spin wave, probably in the etheric medium. And a soliton can be combined with that etheric spin that comes out. And in that case, you can imagine that if you had a magnetotoroelectrical cluster or radiation, this is itself a cluster of etheric dipoles and neutrinos. If they are then moving around on that spin wave that's coming out of the structure, you would end up by producing these strange radiation tracks. And if they were fractal structures that were moving around on a spin wave, you would end up with the kind of impacts that you see on the Lion reactor and other type of caterpillar tracks. And I've done a whole video on how spinning a torus around a center can lead to all of the observable tracks that we've seen in Lena work. And so bringing these two ideas together, you have a complete understanding of how these tracks are formed. Okay. In my judgment, it is the rotating string that leaves the microcrater on the surface it hits. The diameter of the microcrater, D, with an experimental accuracy of 5%, is directly proportional to the atomic weight A of the nucleus 1 from which the rotating string flew out. Furthermore, the volume of microcraters for the range of atomic weights from carbon to lead is also a fixed constant with a measurement accuracy of 10%. This spin jet is registered by the detector described in 3 in the field of high energy solitons. Okay, so I've gone into his previous work. I will add the references into the blog so you know what I'm talking about there. If you don't know, and because it's just too much to talk about in one evening. The soliton shell turns into either a medium energy soliton or that should be a high energy soliton. But in the case of supercritical impact, for example, by a sharp electromagnetic pulse, the soliton shell can also collapse. In this case, it gives birth to about 10 to the power 11 high energy electrons with energies up to 10 kiloelectron volts, which in turn generate soft X-ray radiation and a stream of new solitons. Okay, so the 10 to the 11 is from Ken Shoulders. Okay, the up to 10 kiloelectron volts, this is observed by Ken Shoulders. Soft X-rays observed by Ken Shoulders. Okay, so what they're saying is that this shell, which can be a high energy or medium energy soliton, if you hit that with a supercritical impact, which could be a sharp electromagnetic pulse, that shell can break up into a whole bunch of electrons. Okay? So what opportunity does that give us? What opportunity does that give us? Remember my question at the first part of this presentation is we have two methods where a fractal toroidal geometry can produce excess energy. One, by the decay of baryons. Two, by the capture of zero-point energy, vacuum fluctuations, positron-electron pair annihilations. Okay, polarizing, generating, collapse, annihilation, capture photons. Okay, can also do fusion and fission as well. But there's another method. Okay, there's another method. And it's emergent from what I'm discussing here. I won't say it if someone doesn't guess it, but I'm going to discuss it in the coming weeks. Okay. Traces of microcraters on X-ray film. Okay, so these are the traces he's talking about. These impact craters, their width and their depth can be calculated from the atom that was impacted upon. Okay. In paper 5, a rough estimation of the shock factor from rotating strings on a human organism was carried out via the energy required to heat water located in the volume of the microcrater, one of these craters, to a temperature of 1000 degrees C. This energy will be equal to 3.7 times 10 to the power minus 12, which equals 23.6 mega electron volts. The thickness of a damaged film layer is 40 nanometers, and the density of the material is close to 103 kilograms per meter cubed. If 1 microcrater per 1 centimeter squared of irradiated film layer weighing 4 times 10 to the power minus 9 kilograms is detected, the absorbed dose will be equal to 9.45 times 10 to the minus 4 joules per kilogram, or about 9.45 times 10 to the minus 4 grays. Okay, so this is a cross-section of one of these impact craters that's caused by the ejection of this rotating string. The author believes that the main factor of radiation damage to biological organisms is the high-energy string spin jets described above. Now, the translation on this was so bad, I'm going to have to confirm it with Shishkin. I'm just going to read it anyway. The paper 4 presents the damage caused, in my opinion, to electronic equipment which was located on the beam path of a small-sized ion accelerator behind a shield of lead, which exceeds the calculated value many times. Let us consider possible mechanisms of interaction of rotating strings with matter under different conditions of their birth. 1.1. Gamma radiation. The depth of penetration of gamma quanta into matter is determined by their energy and material of the medium. In addition to the standard model of interaction of gamma quanta with matter, a part of their energy will be spent on the birth of rotating strings and solitons. Together they would form a string vortex soliton that would be considered magnetotor-electrical radiation, and if it had charge on it, that would be a magnetotor-electrical cluster. These are all forms of exotic vacuum objects. Rotating strings mechanically damage the cornea of eyes. Don't want that. Walls of loose tissues, primarily brain, lung, and peristaltic tissues. This mechanism easily explains the presence of blood in the lungs and on the walls of the peristalsis in mammalian acute radiation injury. It seems to me that the factor of organismal lesion by rotating strings is determinative. They've done the experiments with animals. Based on the existing experimental data, it can be concluded that the kinetic energy of rotating strings generated by gamma quanta from radioactive isotopes is not large, and their travel in air does not exceed a few millimeters. Yay. Good. Excellent. We like that. Decay of radioactive isotopes. The kinetic energy of rotating strings born from the decay of radioactive isotopes is small. This statement is confirmed by the fact that 125 iodine is used to destroy prostate cancer. The decay of 1.25 iodine occurs due to electron capture, K capture, by the nucleus. The product of this reaction is 125 tellurium in an excited state. The excitation is removed by soft X-rays of about 0.035 million electron volts. Scientists claim that the soft gamma quanta give birth to short-range Auger electrons that strike cancer cells. In my opinion, that is Alexander Shishkin's opinion, the main striking factor in rotating strings born each time, is the rotating strings born each time 125 iodine nuclei decay, which damage cancer tissue with an energy release of 23.6 million electron volts. Since the rotating strings have a small range, healthy tissue located up to 5 millimeters away from the radioactive source are not damaged. He's completely rethinking, given the new evidence, how a key process of radiation therapy for cancer can be explained. Right, fast neutrons and charged particles. In addition to the known mechanisms of interaction of these particles with matter, part of their energy is spent on the creation of ether solitons, including rotating strings and high-energy soliton forms of them. The amount and penetrating ability of rotating strings depends on the energy of the primary particles. At low energies, the main energy of contaminated particles is spent on ionization losses, and a part of energy, for example, alpha particles from radioactive elements, generate short-range rotating strings. A cloud of short-range rotating strings and slow, low-energy solitons arises near such sources. So that is, alpha particles gets short-range RSTs and low-energy solitons. As the energy of charged particles increases, the fraction of ionization losses decreases, but at the same time, the energy and striking power of rotating strings increases. This is confirmed by the conclusion of experimental work listed in 5. Therefore, it is necessary to additionally study the radiation levels of rotating strings behind the shielding of high-energy accelerators on the trajectory of beams behind targets. So we literally have another person here that is concluding in this section that we must better understand the observation of rotating strings and other solitons, exotic vacuum objects that may be emitted by accelerators. So we have two different independent people saying we've got to really study this because people that are near to accelerators might be suffering this radiation which you cannot detect with normal radiation detectors. Okay? Dischargers. Near arresters, including air-water arresters, from 0.5 of a kilovolt, short-range rotating strings and low-energy solitons are generated. Almost all of the energy in these arresters is spent to create a spark discharge. However, with increasing power and decreasing discharge fronts at a large distance from the arrestor due to electromagnetic disturbances, low-energy solitons located in the surrounding space and in the human body begin to collapse, generating short-range rotating strings. Their effect on the body will be similar to exposure to ionizing radiation. Their effect on the body will be similar to exposure to ionizing radiation. This is why welders have diseases similar to those of professionals working in radiation environments. So what he is saying here is that when you are a welder and you're striking that arc and you're doing that high current initial pulse, you are going to be producing an EMP, and that EMP is going to interact with the environmental charge clusters, the environmental low-energy solitons that exist in the environment and throughout your body, and they will cause them to dishevel in the terms of Ken shoulders, and they will eject these high energy up to 10 kiloelectron volt photons that will produce locally short range rotating strings and more solitons of various energies, and these could go on to do actual damage that is observed by people that are working with actual radioactive sources. This is a critical thing. So when I'm saying, on the one hand, it's potential for these systems to produce a form of radiation that we need to understand and could have negative or positive health benefits, and you're going to see the positive health benefits later on and which form they take. We are dealing with a type of radiation that people don't know exists, but there has been evidence of the type of cancers and damages for instance, welders and other people in other circumstances. These things are real, And if they're going to ban these technologies that we're looking to introduce on the assumption that the type of radiation might be of this dangerous type, which we can have shielding for, then they need to ban welding. They need to ban being next to a fast rotating object. They need to be banning next to electromagnetic pulses, like you might get from, let's say, a microwave or something, or any fast impinging electromagnetic pulse. Or, one might argue, if you have field interference and energy concentration on interference nodes. Okay. Emitters of electromagnetic fields. Near electromagnetic field emitters, including coils and capacitors, to which high voltage from 0.5 of a kiloelectron volt short from 10 to 20 microseconds pulses are applied. Mainly rotating strings are generated, with short electromagnetic pulse waves generating short-range rotating strings, including in the human body at very long distances from the source of the disturbance. This exposure would be similar to the body being hit by ionizing radiation. This is shocking, and I don't mean that in a pun sense. It is shocking. You know, there are standards throughout the Western world for preventing electromagnetic pulses. If it's a scalar pulse, I don't know what you can do about it, really. But this is serious in terms of, you know, people say they're sensitive to certain types of electric arcs or whatever. I certainly am. And this is something we need to think about and understand more. And I thank Alexander Shishkin. It's a deep honor for him to have shared this with me. And, you know, the logic stacks up. The logic stacks up. Graph 1 shows the spectrum of the detectors described in 3. So you can build these detectors and you can evaluate in your own experiments whether this is occurring. Okay? This is not hidden science. Okay? Located near an air capacitor, when a short up to 200 microseconds high voltage pulses, 25 kilovolts, with a frequency of 230 hertz, are applied to the air capacitor. Okay? Now, the device I intend to build will have similar kind of short duration pulses, ideally shorter, like this kind of length. Won't be so high voltage, but certainly will be at least multiples of that, and will be around this number of hertz. Okay, so this device will produce this type of radiation, and it must to affect the outcome we want to achieve. The mains power of the transmitter does not exceed 30 watts. Okay. The electromagnetic radiation emitter, EMI, was located at a distance of 100 centimeters, 1 meter that is, from the detector. On the x-axis, the energy of radiation in relative units is plotted. On the y-axis, the number of impulses in consecutive intervals of 0.8 relative units per 1000 seconds is plotted. Signals from lower energy solitons are located in the range from 0 to 300 relative units. Signals from medium energy solitons in the range of 70 to 750 relative units, with a maximum of 300 relative units. Signals from high energy solitons and rotating strings in the range from 300 to 1500 relative units, with a maximum in the region of 700 relative units. What am I talking about here? This is the 0 to 300 to 750 to up to 1500 relative units. These are the impulses per 0.8 of a relative unit 1000 second impulses. Okay, so this is your frequency here. Okay, so if you look here, if I just zoom that out a bit, just a little bit, okay. Black graph, FON, this one here, natural background. So this detector has detected the natural background of low energy solitons. Okay? All right? Red graph, FON-C here, this one here, all that, is the spectrum when high voltage pulses are applied to the capacitor. Bearing in mind this is 1 meter away. Blue graph C, this one here, is the contribution of high voltage ether solitons, rotating strings. So these are the rotating strings that are generated by these pulses. 200 microseconds, 25 kilovolts on a 230 hertz cycle, no more than 30 watts power. 100 centimeters from detector, the low energy solitons are from 0 to 300. So this is from 0 to 300 relative units there. That's the low energy solitons. The medium energy solitons are from 70 to 750. So from, what does it say? So from 70 to 750. So 70 to 750. So none of the background solitons are higher than medium. Okay, and they're quite, most of them are much lower and in the low. But you can see that where does it say? The high energy solitons rotating strings are from 300 to 1,500. So 300, yes, there's basically none down here, but really they get produced quite nastily from this process. Okay. When registering rotating strings, high energy solitons from dischargers and EMI emitters, the detector described in 3 can be calibrated in the first approximation using gamma radiation source 60 cobalt or 137 cesium at a consecutive irradiation doses of 0.001 gray, 0.01 gray, and 0.1 gray, plotting the dependence of the number of high energy solitons on the irradiation dose. Essentially what he's describing here is you can use this reference to build a detector, and you can calibrate the detector using either 60 cobalt or 137 cesium using these. I'm going to try and get from him a more precise protocol for doing the calibration and so forth. But this will give you an ability, I think, to have a better understanding of the type and intensity of flux of these things coming out of your device. And that will help us build a unlimited generator of energy and a propulsion device that will work at any point in the universe. So quite important to know this stuff. I mean, there's one thing to speculate, but knowing stuff is different. And it's based on experiment, right? Okay, so it's the meat and potatoes. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. They'd have already done it. Maybe they have already done it, but anyway. Nothing great was ever done in a day. Right. Low and medium energy solitons. Low energy solitons, low LES, have the following properties experimentally detected. Not pie in the sky stuff, not theoretical explanations or hypothesis, experimentally detected. And that's what I love. What I really like about the team at Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute and Dubna, and what's happening with Binzhuan Huang and the experiments we've done in the Vega experiments and the Ultra experiments and the Nova experiments, these are all physical experiments and they produce data. The data has been consistent, it's been extraordinary, and you can make real physical comparisons to natural things on different scales. And this isn't pie in the sky stuff, but what you are looking at here right now is the cutting edge. This isn't something that was done in the 1950s, although it might have been done in the 1950s, but you'd think that if they'd have known about this type of radiation in the 1950s, they might have said something, because it's been killing a lot of people. Other than don't get near this thing when it's operating, because bad things happen, which might be the level of understanding they've got to. But we are getting down to the meat and potatoes, I believe, now. They fill all, so low energy solitons, they fill all the space around us, including living and non-living objects. They resemble gel in their fluidity. They fill all the space around us. So Ken Shoulders said that exotic vacuum objects are ubiquitous. They are the chi. They are the chi. So the person that was asking me about chi earlier, this is the chi. Okay? They fill all the space around us, including living and non-living objects. So you can get energy out of a rock. You can get energy out of metal. You can get energy out of living beings. Of course, with an electromagnetic pulse of the right disruptive ability, you can cause these things to blow up and cause damage. And that is not good. This means that if you were to cause field interference to cause a disruption which had a high impulse at a particular point in space and time, it would release all of this bound up, tied up energy, and naturally you could understand that this might have a thermal effect on that environment or a physical kinetic effect. 2. Low energy solitons have magnetic properties, right? So this might be the magnetic charges that were being talked about in that first paper that we were going through by the team at Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. Some of the low energy solitons have a positive charge. Not all, but some. I assume that low energy solitons participate in the cold transformation of atoms of chemical elements, including in living organisms. This is how the Tibetan monk might live on a few pine needles and water. You know, you might be able to live with fasting because your body switches into a mode where it starts to gain energy from nuclear transformations using low energy solitons in a controlled fashion. Okay? There's a lot of energy bound into these things that are otherwise neutral. But they have magnetic properties, so the body can maybe capture them and move them around. It has been experimentally discovered that low energy solitons can quench luminescent centers, including in biological objects. For example, in luminescent crustaceans. Yes, Wim Hof has this mastered. Yes, Earthworm Jim. It is possible that low energy solitons have the property of quenching scintillation centers. This is in like sodium iodide scintillators. And I believe that this sort of thing happened when we had our signal back in the GS 5.2 days. Thank you, Alan Goldwater. Low energy solitons have a favorable effect on all living things, greatly enhancing the regenerative ability of living cells and organisms. Boom! Right there and then, we have what he's saying here is that this is chi. It can have a regenerative effect. It can enhance the growth of things. Right there, he's saying that. These are exotic vacuum objects, but they are ubiquitous, and it's the low energy versions that you want. And we're going to find out how they can be made. We've already discussed it many times, but he's going to be very specific in a minute. In rooms where experiments with discharges and radioactive sources are regularly carried out, the concentration of low-energy solitons increases significantly. In rooms where experiments with discharges and radioactive sources are regularly carried out, the concentrations of low-energy solitons increases significantly. Remember, these are the same things as static electricity. These solitons, these etheric vortices. Okay? You don't want the high energy ones. Remember what I said, you want to produce these things and then let them dissipate. Like if you blow up some structures and they produce a load more low energy solitons from the release of the 10 kilo electrons as they dishevel, they will go on and produce more rotating strings, and this will lead to more low energy solitons, and ultimately they will get to this low energy soliton state. And those are the things that you want to capture. And it's interesting because we're going to see how we can capture these. When low energy solitons are impacted by strong electromagnetic pulse or mechanical impact, significant energy is released in the form of a powerful flux up to 10 to the power 11 of fast up to 10 kiloelectron volt electrons and have 5 orders of magnitude fewer ions. This is directly from Kenneth Radford Shoulders. Directly. They confirmed it. I assume that inside blood vessels and capillaries, the dynamic changes of soliton size, these micrometers, are subject to the rhythms of the heart. So is he saying that there's some sort of cavitation going on, or the pressures in there, that these things can maybe be influenced by the heart pulse? Possibly. Possibly. This is absolutely critical. Low energy solitons are absorbed well by water. Boom! Remember what I said. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower would probably need a water source running underneath it. The water source would be capturing at point of generation in the ground, or as it went through the environment, a flux, and embodying into it, and this would be drawn into that structure. This is how you can make energy water. You can expose water to a flux generated by sparks or whatever. That is what the Vachaev reactor is doing. You are discharging into a flow of water with contaminants, and there appears to be transmutation going on there. This follows from his inference that he's basically saying these are the things that are causing these exotic vacuum objects that are bound into the water, are allowing for the transmutation of nuclei. And I will say it again if I haven't made it clear in the past. The proven nuclear transmutation system of the hydro wave was not just a stator and a rotator with annular rings that went down in went higher and higher frequency as it went to the outside of the disk that span. They absolutely necessarily had an AC discharge between high power electrode discharge in the water. That would produce HHO and all of the mixes that we've seen from the analysis of the HHO of Reusch and Amaza. But it would also, because of those critical impacts over a certain size, would produce a range of these solitons and these rotating strings that would get dissolved in the water. And then, you know, it doesn't say necessarily bound to the oxygen. I argue that it's bound to the oxygen, but it gets absorbed well by the water, and then it goes into and is in the active place that it's necessary to do the cavitation driven transmutation process. And they proved Kladoff was right. In their case, they used strontium-90, yttrium-90 and remediated that at a high rate of change. In the case of Kladoff, they used cesium-137. Okay, so, and in the case of Amaza, he used tritium. So, and I think cesium-137 in other tests. So, you're seeing a commonality between all of these different systems. I suggested to Binder and Huang last year and prior to the end of last year and in the middle of early part of last year that he use either electrolysis directly in the flow to introduce some hydrogen and oxygen into the flow and other ions, but also to introduce this type of clusters that will enable the transmutation. But of course, in the ultra experiments, when you have that cavitation collapse, you have these impacts that are over this critical threshold in order to create these solitons and rotating strings. So cavitation, you get this for free. Explosions in industries associated with grinding of matter, such as flour and sugar. Explosions in mines are easily explained by a large concentration of low-energy solitons, i.e. a concentration of static electricity. Low-energy solitons can be carried by light rays, in particular by laser. Now, I will go into this more, but I have the paper from Zatelepin, but they were using a spark discharge in a chamber, and around that they had a light fiber made of glass, and they passed a low-energy laser in that, and they were capturing these low-energy solitons. According to Shishkin, I agree with Shishkin, it was being passed into a chamber containing just CO2 gas, and at the bottom of the chamber there was these white lumps appearing. Those white lumps were sent to me, and they turned out to contain aluminium. If you take carbon and oxygen and you do an exchange reaction, you end up with aluminium and hydrogen. And so I believe that that was the synthesis path. They have a different view because they're thinking about dark hydrogen, but that's okay too. But I think Shishkin is correct here. Low energy solitons can be carried by light rays. This means you can create a flux which you can impinge into a particular location. This has profound implications for how we can generate energy. Low energy solitons can transfer, with the help of light and or electromagnetic radiation, the properties of matter and biological objects through which they pass. So they can capture the properties of the atoms and materials through which they pass. The described properties of low energy solitons explain the useful therapeutic properties of uranium tablets and radon baths, mineral springs, and so on. This is due to the fact that alpha sources generate near themselves low energy solitons, and mineral waters deep in the earth, due to the high mechanical stresses, are also saturated with LES. Boom! Why do I say that? One, I believe that this area in the Czech Republic, right where I am in Brno, where it has low ambient radiation, but it's in a country which has one of the highest background radiation from radon, produces vast amounts of low energy solitons. They are dissolved into the water and they are feeding into the city that are in which I live. The same as where I grew up in the UK. Okay, so, and second boom here is this supports my hypothesis for how the Great Pyramid worked. By using granite, which will produce alpha particles and radon, it will produce vast quantities of low energy solitons. The low energy solitons are what allow for fractal clustering, and they are neutral and magnetic. Neutral and magnetic. Okay, so they can end up allowing for a magnetohydrodynamic structure forming in the Great Pyramid. Medium energy solitons have a low energy soliton peak on the leading edge and a high energy soliton peak on the trailing edge, properties of the black graph. So if you go up to the black graph here, this is the black graph. So we have low energy solitons down here and medium energy solitons up here. Okay, they are the background. Okay. Conclusion. All the facts presented make a strong case for conducting in-depth scientific research to answer the following far from complete questions. 1. What is the specific energy required for the formation of RST, rotating strings, high energy solitons? How does it depend on the elemental composition of the excited material? Now, in his previous work, or the group's previous work, they have shown that it is 2,000 to 4,000 times easier to produce the solitons of whatever energy they are. And of course, if the impact is higher, they'll be higher, from hydrogen than it is for any other element beyond lithium. Okay, so hydrogen is really easy to produce these things which are critical to health and to biological positive effects, and also to nuclear transmutation. How does the energy of the rotating strings depend on the energy of the neutrons and charged particles that generate the RST? So he's looking for correlations there, specific correlations. They've done a very good correlation with a constant factor to find out the volume and the depth of the pits based on the atoms that are captured by the structures. What detectors should be used to register the new type of radiation? Okay, so they've got one. I've suggested one. But, you know, these are things that need to be investigated further. What are the effects of this radiation on biological objects? They've done a lot of work, but there's a lot of, this is a whole blue ocean of opportunity in various fields. What are the radiation levels from these quanta behind the shielding of charged particle accelerators, in particular behind the targets along the primary beam path of accelerated particles? Yeah. I wouldn't want to work near an accelerator. I just wouldn't because they don't know what this radiation is, and they're not considering it in their health for operators. How do we protect ourselves from this new radiation? What are the biological and genetic effects of this radiation on biological objects? Well, he's done some speculative things based on this is the amount of energy we can hypothesize is produced by these things based on the impact. Is it doing this much damage to things? But what he is fairly certain about is that what really is hugely beneficial to life is this low energy natural radiation, and that they can be increased by things like radon and so forth. But you don't want to be breathing the radon into your lungs. You want to be allowing the radon to produce the clusters that then go into the water, and then you drink the water. Okay, you don't want to be drinking the lead that might come from the decay of the radon. You want the charge clusters, which are neutral and magnetic. And so by spinning your water, you're going to be able to create some kind of rotating electric current that will allow some magnetic focusing, that will allow some capture of this form of radiation. Okay. So that, my friends, is that effectively what I've argued today is that in multiple instances, you have to exercise the Semmelweis reflex in order to believe our agent Smith here that there is no O. Right now, from my point of view, it is absolutely conclusive, and you're going to see that with not a lot of effort, you will know that you know how to produce an unlimited energy generator which has propulsive effects. And I'm going to walk you through that step by step. But with what we've discussed here today, we can understand how our tornado, in this case a fire tornado, a firenado, is driven by exactly the same processes that are in the wind hex, which of course is based on tornado research. And it has the same form here when it's nice and stable as the wind hex. It's just beautiful how nature just repeats itself over and over. And that in the work at the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute, they found this impact, which is exactly and precisely the structure. You can see how the curve comes in here, the curve comes in here. It's exactly and precisely just as we've seen on so many things now. It's laughable how exact nature does things, and how the double layer of the boundary lines up with just this crash zone, and that they saw what I would consider, if they analyze this, a crenelated sphere, but I would consider that this has at least some iron in it. And they noted that on one side, exactly as we've seen, and only on one side, exactly as we've seen in so many different experiments by different authors repeatedly in subsequent experiments as well. There is a hole on one side. And I believe this is where the material comes both in when it's forming and out when it's depressurizing, as you might say. And we worked over this, and I need to work with this researcher just to clarify. In his work here, he talks not only about how this explains tornado here, it also explains these celestial structures, and I agree with that entirely. Normal cavitation, imploding bubbles, correctly defined. Structures like these, how they can all be explained by the spin jets that get produced. So I'll do the full translation of this and share it, and I'll work with him on getting it corrected. The proton model, very explained. I think it's, and the formation of a neutron, or sorry, the decay of a neutron into proton, electron, and an antineutrino, I think it's well explained. My intuition, I will do this video of these three-part exotic vacuum objects interacting in the David Boutelier Vega experiment. For me, that was a real watershed moment personally in my understanding. It also explains why you get these weird movements of strange radiation tracks. If you can imagine, there's several flying around in an environment, one penetrates through a foil here, you'll get them going round each other on the foil. It just looks like a weird change in direction, but it's just what they do when they're interacting with each other's event horizons. So yeah, big moment for me, and this, it could only possibly be something that's shooting out in front of it faster than it's traveling, and it's spinning with something that is the foundation of what everything else is based on. If you're saying these exotic vacuum objects are based on etheric vortices, then it must be a spin in the etheric medium, and they are saying it's superluminal, and I would suggest that it is. And I would suggest that when we look at these various pressure gradients that he is showing here, and we apply them to our geometry, we will see that somehow there is a higher pressure behind and a lower pressure in front. And therefore, even though it's firing out this beam in this pencil-thin spin beam in front of it, the overall vector is in the direction of the magnetohydrodynamics, and it effectively forms a propulsion system. And I'm pretty certain that within this year we are going to see, if we don't do it, it's going to be done by someone, because like this is so clear to me now. It's going to be pretty obvious how to do this, and it's not hard. It's just not hard. You just have to do it. It's a bit like Griffin Brock. You just have to do it. You just have to do it. Just do it. Okay. Yeah. So, and I think understanding these pressure curves and everything will help. Yeah. So there's that, and then lastly, coming back to what we were talking about in the last section here with our friend Alexander Shishkin, a phenomenological model of radiation exposure. He explains things that have never been considered before in radiation exposure, and I agree with them. It must have taken a lot for him to accept to change his own model, and that's the sign of a real scientist. And it goes to show that this international collaboration and the risks taken by people who are not wealthy and not funded by, national labs or governments has made a real difference in the understanding of this science. So you can pat everyone out there, you can pat yourselves on the back, but I want to again thank my colleague Alan Goldwater and my colleague Dr. Bin Juan Huang, because without it we would not have realized this level of certainty of information. And the killers for me in here is that this rounds out that the possibility of creating low energy solitons that can massively improve health. So where we go. It's in all matter. So this is, for me, I've always said this is the hidden energy within matter, which we can release. They are magnetic. They cause cold transmutation. They greatly enhance the regenerative abilities of living cells and organisms. The low energy solitons versions, the medium and high, can end up by, well, the high can cause damage, but what you don't want to be is around short duration electromagnetic pulses, or even from, you know, intense quick and fast capacitor, high voltage capacitor pulses. You just don't want to do that, because this is going to cause effective radiation exposure in your body. Okay. Okay, so and that's even at some quite some distances. Okay. And then this comment here about uranium, radon baths and mineral springs and so on, this comports with my idea of how the Wardenclyffe Tower would have needed a water source. It also says that if you are going to clean up a source of these radiation, so imagine you've got some exotic vacuum objects that are very active and they are self-generating to a degree because they blow up, producing an EMP. The EMP causes another one nearby to disrupt and blow up. They produce a lot of 10 kilo electron volt electrons. They impact with other nuclei. Those nuclei then are releasing their low energy, or their solitons, and those solitons then, in a situation where they can blow up, you can see a cascade event could occur here. And so you could have metal, for instance, that is infected with these structures having been exposed to a high generation of them, either by field interference or so forth. And then it would take a long time for those things to come out. So how would you decontaminate it? Well, you would use water. You would flow water over it, just like you can't get static electricity building up in an environment where it's really damp. You need to go to the desert, like Tesla did, like Henry Moray did. You know, you need to go to a dry environment. Okay, it's really dry here in the Czech right now, so lots and lots of crazy static. So you have to go to an environment which does not have a lot of water. Okay, so if you are going to decontaminate a place that has been highly exposed to these things, you need to use water. Okay. All right, so I'm going to see if anyone questions here. Maybe you can capture with bagel coils, yeah, if you make them correctly, but I think plasma is the best way to do it. For me, this evidence is absolutely conclusive now. It's just too much. It's just too much now. I'm going to look at your questions. But remember, there is no O. Aaron, I can discuss that. I've discussed the MH370 video in a number of videos, and I discussed it recently. If you go and look, I did a reasonable section on the last open call for the Evo Labs. So you can go and see my current thinking on that. I need a theme song. Well, I kind of have. I'm actually thinking of it's my brother wrote a song which he donated to the project. He wrote it in the 80s. He was I've sung it before. You can go and see it on my channel. But it's I can see the day that it's not work, it's play, it's the people's right, yeah. Sitting in the sun, making love, having fun, it's the people's right, yeah. The stifling of technology is a crime. To make things to fail is a waste of time. We should make things to last. Stop getting stuck in the past. We'll feed the world with ease. Reduce the working week. Okay, so yeah, I was going to make an AI version of it. So you can go and download the MIDI track and the lyrics, and even me doing a sing of it on remoteview.icu. And it'd be great if someone would have a go at it. I actually paid someone to do a score, so it's all there. Hey Bob, how do you make static electricity? That's what we've been talking about, because static electricity is erzions, it is exotic vacuum objects, it is you know, orgone energy, it's all of these things, all of the above. And several examples given in that translation I did. I will publish the translation as a separate blog on remoteview.icu with a read through. But he's saying that any alpha sources, or like radon or whatever, they will produce low energy solitons, and the low energy solitons are effectively static electricity. Old man Bills, are you going to cover Tesla's one-wire energy? I think there's probably better sources for that. I think if you imagine you can create from a 5 electron volt impulse the release of 10 to the 11 electrons that have 10 kilo electron volts worth of energy, you can see how you can make a lot of energy. And I think that to a degree, these things are coming out from the Brock electrode, which is effectively a one-wire transmitter. And I know David Boutelier is going to see if he can transmit energy using a Brock electrode to a receiver. So that is already underway within the auspices of MFMP volunteers. His Highness or Highness, I don't apologize for being late. That's what the playback's for. Where did you say your song is posted? It's let me see. It's on Remote View. Let me just find the title of the blog. It's not my song; it's the project song, but my brother wrote it. I'll have to find it another day. I think it's Breaking Stones. It's not Breaking Stones, but oh yeah. So it's on Breaking Stones. It was published on December the 9th, 2021. So you can see a music score there written by Yuji Motel. And my brother doing a first playthrough in about 20 years off the top of his head. And the lyrics are overlaid. So you can see there's a MIDI file, synthesized piano accompaniment, synthesized piano melody, my raw vocal, vocal score, and all the sources zipped together. So you can have a look. Yeah, are you old man Bills, are you out with the fire problems? I'm sorry to hear that. If you are, it sucks. Guy on the donkey, hello, he says, got my bike going, Bob. Going to be testing it this week. Funny thing happens when the bike I used a UVC, oh, motorbike, I guess. Oh, great, excellent. Let's see if it, cool. Okay, it is 1:11 here, so I think I'm going to call it a night. And say, despite what this chat might have you believe, there is O. And it's going to deliver some great things, I believe, this year. And you might see it in things, or you might see things that look fantastical, and they're going to be using this. So thank you, everyone, for your time. Sorry it was a slow start today. I had to work through that paper because it's so significant. All of the links will be in the blog over the next few days. And with that, I'll say buenas noches, dobranoc, good night, and Happy New Year.